as an innuendo, but it had to do
that-
with vitamin D, and there was quite a lot of backlash.
D.
Did
Did they
but
do the same thing?
A bit of a backlash.
A bit of a backlash on get the D? Yeah. Get
that's
your
an
D.
unfortunate angle.
Like,
to
come
come
on,
back
let's be a
from.
little cheeky. Let's love it. Let's love and ignore it.
Stop trying to sexualize our health.
Hi, Yukon, I love ya.
So then I just initial this.
And then
Pass it. I can pass it over. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh, Yukon.
Across the floor.
Ships passing in the night.
Okay, folks, I'd like to call the meeting to order.
We'll be back.
I'm sitting in for Mayor Morrison today as acting mayor. And we expect Mayor Morrison to be back next week in time for the next business meeting. I'll start with the land acknowledgement. We'd like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Kootenay, the Silex, and the Sinaiks people, and is home to the Métis and many diverse Aboriginal persons. We honor their connection to the land and rivers and respect the importance of the environment to our strength as a community. We'll start with some late items. Any late items? Hearing none. Need a motion to adopt the agenda as presented. Councillor Tate and Payne. All in favor? Thank you. And adoption of minutes from the previous meeting. Are you on that? And do we have any?
I'm red.
Okay.
That's we're not doing that.
On,
It's in camera.
I don't think we've got a workshop today,
Multitask.
and we're moving right into the city manager's report. CAO, over to you.
Well, the good news, we have hired a new general manager for
What's the full title?
planning, climate and infrastructure, I think we
Got it.
call it. Or some combination of those words. So we haven't released that yet, so I'm not going to say who it is at this stage, but I can let you know in camera. So that's good. May 1st, they'll be able to start, and they are local. So otherwise, we're still trying to find bargaining dates with fire and IBW. I think we have the budget open house. Nelson Hydro, we're still working through the process for both our reconsideration for the COSA and for the 2023 revenue revenue requirement. Looks like they're going to have a second round of IRs for the revenue requirement, and we're still responding to IR information requests.
Oh, yeah, right.
So-
Okay, thank you. So another round of those?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
jeez. Okay.
Yeah, so we've done the first round. We had, I think, 4 interveners, plus, the BCUC staff, which is a little unusual for that type of rate application. We have addressed that as a concern of the amount of regulatory time that is, and the impact and the staffing that we have to do that, and the impact on rates. We had what's called PACA requests. So I'm not sure if it's every intervener, but the larger ones like the BC old age pensioners. They created another one for residential customers, and between those two, I believe, for the COSA it was over $80,000 that they are requesting to get funded. That comes directly from rates of our rural customers. So we certainly have raised that with the Utility Commission, that all we're seeing is more and more regulatory costs. We spent well over $100,000 on our own costs, regulatory costs. So I know both Gabe and Scott have had discussions with the BCUC staff and just raised that as we don't necessarily see the value, especially on a rate application where it's pretty straightforward. It goes through council first before it ever gets to the utility commission. You know, we do open houses, we do all that process, and so it seems, at least in our opinion, a bit of an overkill on that. But ultimately, it's their process. They recognize those costs, and those get passed on to rural customers. So that's where we are with the rate applications for BC Hydro. You know, I had a meeting with Sebastian yesterday, just in terms of the pier. We have come up with a solution for the airport and building that project. So the airport will be open part-time and all day on Sundays, and the construction will happen outside those hours. They just can't happen at the same time. I think right now it looks like the airport, based on what the users wanted, will be open till noon and then close, and the construction will happen after that time. So our noise bylaw, just so council's aware, is you can work up to 10 o'clock. The contractor might be working up to 10 o'clock. We're likely going to, you might hear some people concerned about the noise. Not much you can do around piles, other than you have to bang them into the ground, and that's a bit noisy. I think they projected 9 weeks, I believe, that they believe the length of time that will take.
And start time?
I believe they'll, hoping, I believe, to start next week. They have the cranes there, the piles are there, they were ready to go, we just had to deal with the airport.
And there'll be a communication out, like on the normal channels of
that's
what's
right.
happening in case
Yeah.
you're living out there somewhere and you think there's an earthquake or something. You'll know that that's
Yeah.
not what it is. Sorry to interrupt there.
Okay. I saw a question there.
Yeah, that was the same comment as just being in front of the communication. I'd rather us have a video go out like this week saying this is happening and there's an adjustment around the airport, so things will be running later. So people are introduced to it before the banging happens.
Welcome to Nelson signage. I just signed the contract to do the fabrication for that signage. I believe Sebastian said it could take 2 months to, get them fabricated. They are going on the two, that one on the North Shore and the one from Castlegar will go on the same bases that are there now. We will be moving the one from Salmo closer to the city. People have never really liked where it is. It's actually outside the city, and we go through that not the prettiest part of the rural area coming into Nelson. So we will make sure we move it so that you're actually in Nelson proper when you see it. And we're just finalizing the the wayfinding signage that they presented the other day. So we'll be working with our staff on on that implementation side, and we talked yesterday, and we don't have a final plan, but we do want to bring together hopefully tourism, the visitor information center, our staff that work in those parks and other public places all the time, just to talk about what that looks like, where those priorities are. Sebastian does feel that the budget we had for that should accommodate all the signage that we need. Not, wouldn't accommodate like a large park sign, but it will accommodate all the wayfinding signs. And what we're going to do is, I've asked them to make sure that, that if we're going to, do all these signage in our parks, let's do all our parks. So whatever park you come to, it looks like it's, it's that same branding, same look. And just to let you know, I can't remember who asked what mountain that was. It was Mount Nelson, but Mount Nelson is by Invermere, not Nelson. So that has been changed. It will be Weimer Peak, which is a very recognizable peaks.
Sorry, when,
I got it. I just got to say that's a nice catch there
Yes.
before it was all made.
Yeah. Now, we're obviously not super happy with the consult. Like, how do you peak that's not actually in Nelson? Google. Yeah.
So the, may I question through the chair, that, what you're saying about Sebastian with the budget, that was all a grant. That was like some
Yeah.
kind of COVID tourism recovery grant thing,
That's
something?
correct.
Sweet.
correct. Yeah.
Lovely.
sorry, I didn't catch, when are we expecting the welcome signs to see installation?
2 months.
2 months.
They believe that, so we broke up the fabrication different from the installation. I guess installing on highways has some different set of requirements. One, I think we are gonna, approach YRB potentially to install those signs. So the fabrication is estimated about 2 months. Don't know how long the installation. I wouldn't think it's, that difficult since we're putting them on those same bases. Obviously the one that's coming from the Selmo direction would take a bit longer because you have to re-pour that base. So they should be, what are we, beginning of April, May, June, summer. They should be up by sort of July, I would expect.
Time for Canada Day?
And that,
Yeah.
like, that's separate from the wayfinding. One is the welcome signs and one.
Correct.
And then can I ask another question that's kind of none of the council's business, but I'm curious? Which is like in terms of operations, who installs the wayfinding? That's us. We have to figure out how to do that with our regular crew?
We're still in a bit of debate about that.
Oh, okay.
We may look internally, or depends how we approach it. So we have this, as you saw from the report, there's a map that has all these locations. We haven't gone out and reviewed that map to make sure it's completely accurate. So if we used an outside contractor, then we need an accurate map because they're going to put the signs where the map says, right? Whereas if we use our internal staff, then we have more. Then we don't have to spend all that. I don't know, all that time, but we don't have to be as concerned with the map that it's 100% accurate because they would find they would put them in the right location. Like I said, we'd look at more of an implementation committee, okay, and just have that second set of eyes on it to say, does this, make sense to put this there in this location? Like I said, especially our parks employees, they're in those parks every day, so they know where, those, where people access our parks and where it makes sense for some of those. So I kind of lean that way of using that expertise of our own staff. It will depend whether we have the resources to be able to do that. It might be a combination in the end.
Oh, okay.
So,
Okay, thanks.
we talked about the housing entity study that will come to council. I think it's scheduled here soon.
Today.
Today, really.
Today's the day.
Today's the day, yeah.
Right, they snuck in for that, yeah. So that will be presented today, and I'll leave that for then. Step code, they've been doing the consultation with the building community. I think they are feeling good about where they're at with that, and I'll come back to council. Government Road, the new commercial building that was built there, they're looking at coming back to council for a rezone as residential. CP lands, I think we shared that we have had conversations with CP about freeing up those lands. We're still working with our staff to initially look at, what potential needs we would have on those lands. We want to get off the waterfront where public works are, but we're bursting at the seams. So if we can push, towards the tracks and stay away from the waterfront and use that more for storage. So I know Nelson Hydro's interested in that. So it's happening.
Can I jump in, Rick? Wait. So this is, I I understand where the CP lands are, but we haven't really seen a map. We just talked about CP lands. Did we, so it's the section behind currently Public Works between that and the tracks? Is that what we're talking
well,
about? Did I miss something somewhere? Or?
No.
Okay,
Yeah, so, well, there was, did we not do I thought we did a bit of a presentation on that, did we? Or maybe that
does
was.
anyone have a map that I didn't see?
Yeah, the map's right
Yeah,
here.
no, I
Oh, maybe
mean,
that's
if we
when
had a
we're-
presentation then.
Right, no, we were talking to the CP folks from Calgary.
You did mention that you were talking to them,
Yeah.
but I wasn't exactly
So
sure what
CP
parcel.
lands, the CP flats, towards the
Yep.
west here.
Yep.
Everything behind our building here is CP lands, and all the way down behind, well, in fact, their lands obviously go along their tracks. All that parking behind, the
What I call the end of the dog walk, is that
end of the dog walk is,
transfer station and
yeah, so the transfer station
being
is.
back there.
Yeah, so the transfer station is all on city lands right now, and it's, to the, I guess to the south is CP lands. So anything to the south between the tracks and any buildings on Lakeside, on Lakeside Drive is CP lands. So behind the RDCK building is CP lands. And even, that parking that you see behind the superstore and down towards Hall Street,
Right.
that's all CP lands as well.
And they're looking to sell it.
No, not
No,
necessarily.
they're looking to long-term lease it? Is this?
Well, they're
what?
not necessarily looking for anything in particular. You
Letting
know,
us
we-
use it as friends? No.
Yeah, no, we've,
For that.
And Galen Weston.
well, lots of friends use it, which concerns them. So they would like to see some potential use of it, so that that we avoid that trespass and all those challenges that go on with their land. So no, we've approached CP because we have this real,
That need for
Crunch of-
expanding Public Works.
well, not just Public Works, but there's been lots of commercial that have inquired about the lands. We, as you know, we have no industrial park. We have no industrial land or light industrial lands here. So, Martech, this is land from them already. I think somebody else has stored sand on their lands, etc. So they're all contaminated sites. So what you can do on those lands, and that's the work we're doing, identifying what parcels might be able to use, and then looking at the restrictions on what could be there and what could not be there. Anything probably human interaction probably can't be there. I know for example, the soccer indoor soccer facility, they've inquired about that. I'm not sure that use could be on those lands, but each parcel is, or each area is somewhat different. That it's mostly contaminated through mining, right? They used to clean all the cars out and etc. right on those lands, so it has lots of heavy metals and ore and copper, all that stuff. Also, it was the it was the diesel shop, so all those hydrocarbons, they used to just dump them in a pit and light them on fire, and so there's a
Those were the
whole
days.
fuel. There's a number of test wells on that site. They monitor this, where this contamination is going. It's obviously the water table's right there, so on high water, it's moving back and forth. So it's complicated set property, right? And so there's no easy potential use, but there are certainly parcels. You've seen uses over the years. I think U-Haul used to store their U-Haul trailers and stuff on that land. So it's unlikely they would be looking at selling. CP has a policy of not giving up industrial lands because they're so hard
I
to
thought, yeah.
hard to get these days. So even this yard isn't used that much, but they're quite hesitant to, restrict themselves. They sold off those lands in large cities, Vancouver, elsewhere, where, from a rail operations, they're regretting now.
And isn't that one of the potential sites that the wastewater plant is looking at? Is that down?
No, I don't think we're really looking at,
No.
I think the conclusion is, the present site works, and, there was some discussion, whether it could be somewhere else.
Okay.
Putting something like that on a contaminated site, in my mind, is just looking for trouble down the road. Whose contamination is whose, and et cetera. So that's where we are with the CP lands. And on the Trevor Street development, we're just waiting on a price from a consultant to understand what the cost to do that next level of work. And when we get that, we'll bring that back and to council to look at. You're looking puzzled. The road that we'd have to put through.
I thought it was in camera.
And part of the work will be, I don't know if it'll be done through the OCP, is looking at that whole upper Fairview area. What does that look like? And, what's, developable lands, what's more parklands? How do we access the rail trail, the mountain biking in that area? So I think that, we'll certainly address that as part of the OCP review. What else? I know we've just recently signed a new agreement with the RDCK on the, is it ESA, the ESS, I guess, the Emergency Social Services in the event of a emergency event where people get displaced. So we've just done that. On that, I think we've been working through budget.
Would you be willing to speak to it all, to any implication to like our budget and such with the announcements in the newspaper about the new roles at the RDCK? Is there any like implication to us because we participate in their administrative costs, like as Nelson residents? What does that look like long term? I don't know.
Well, it was March 16th. They passed their financial plan. So for Nelson, City of Nelson residents, that requisition will increase 7.07%.
7%, hey?
Yep. So I know their initial open house, it was a 4.8%. But there was some discussion that if those positions were added, plus some other, I think they ended up transferring more into their reserves as well it's basically that S100 service, right? That we talked about, that's that kind of general admin, and I see Councillor Page has some thoughts there, but yeah, that's sort of the driver behind that additional 2% that was added to the City of Nelson requisition.
And if you're in E&F, it's 13%. So.
Yeah, and to be clear, that those don't have implications on our city budget. It's the city taxpayers.
Yeah.
That's what I meant.
So-
What you meant is what I meant.
Yeah.
Thank you.
When we send out and this is all stuff we can share at the open house as well.
Yeah.
But, when the tax notice comes, or the, tax notice from the City of Nelson, 48% of that is City of Nelson, but 20% is regional district, and there's school tax on there as well. So I think it's just something to keep in mind when you get your bill from the City of Nelson. It's not all City of Nelson, just under half is.
I think it's important to contextualize the individual hires, because you've got some of them in HR and payroll. They'll go into S100, and then they'll be apportioned out to all the services based on the employees that exist. So each service will carry a per employee cost to cover those. And then for the 3 building inspectors, they live inside of a rural service that we don't participate in. And the direction from the board was, and the budget reflects this, was that there be a review of all the service fees that go into the building department, and that those fees be increased to cover the new hires. And so the budget is reflected that there'll be an additional amount of user fees coming in, and they're going through those fees now to see what needs to be increased, because it's been recognized they're artificially low, so those should reconcile themselves. And then IT, again, another hire, but then it gets apportioned out to all of the computers that live in every service, so that's where they'll eventually add up, is wherever there's a computer. Which means obviously recreation has quite a few, and so we'll see a lift inside of recreation's budget. And the other piece there is many of the hires are positioned to be happening at the mid-year point, so they'll be affecting more so next year's budget.
Okay.
So then to be clear, Councillor Page, the discrepancy between that initial 4% and the 7%, that 3% is, so where's that? And are you saying that we're gonna expect something equal or greater next year?
I think when you take the million and break it down into a percentage, if I'm getting this right, then you might end up at a 7. But really what you're talking about is when you take the big chunk of 3 of those payrolls and you compensate it with fees, then that washes out. And then when you take the payroll and HR admins and you apportion them out to all of the services, then its impact is not the direct hire within S100, because then it gets spread out across the RDCK. And the same happens with the IT position.
So then if I'm understanding, you're saying that the 3% that it increased in the course of the process is probably some accounting in that they didn't bank for the apportionment out to the services for the 6 months of the next year, and then next year when that apportionment happens, it'll come through.
No, I can answer some of that, I think.
I,
Yep.
Mayor Morrison has a,
Mayor Morrison, go ahead.
Well, I just
Or-
really briefly, I
Sorry.
just had a few emails going with the CFO over there at the regional district. So I think part of it was to do a bit of smoothing. So they'd be increasing that increase this year in order to then help reduce the impact in future years. So you're seeing that 7% has them putting more into reserves, so that in 2024, 25, I guess they can kind of cushion the impact of those additional staff.
Right. Okay. Mayor Morrison?
well, thank you, Chair Wattenberg. Also, I mean, the thing that happens there a lot at the regional district is that, I mean, this increase is there, so it's not like next year we're gonna have a reduction. As we know, these all compound over time. I imagine that all these staff aren't in position yet, so they will attribute some cost savings to the fact that some of these hires might be taking place a little bit later in this calendar year. But I don't think that, I think that we'll still see increases next year. And unfortunately, one of the bad habits that seem to occur at the regional district is that money is put into reserves in years 1, 2, and 3 of an election, and they're spent like crazy in year 4 before an election, so that they can have a very low tax increase going into an election year. It's a sort of a historical pattern that's been seen over some time, and hopefully with the new people around the table, we will stop seeing that in this 4-year term.
So I just want to be clear here, because, so the 7% is the actual tax increase to Nelson residents. So whether it flows through S100 to recreation or to other services, our set of services that reflects these new costs wherever they ended up is a 7% tax increase, and that won't, that's real. That's, whether it's an S100 or S226, the cost went up, and so that's a real increase. As Councillor Page said, something like building inspection we don't participate in, so that, whether they get new revenues or charge them for fees or whatever, that doesn't impact city residents. So I just want to be clear, this, that flow through means our net requisitions going up 7%, which, anyway, that's the bottom line is it's, significant. And I don't want to throw numbers out here, but it's been significant over the last 4 years, and we'll have a quick look at that, but it's getting, in my mind, super concerning. It's it just doesn't seem sustainable to have 7-8% every year for multiple years. It's I know council really struggled with with the increase that we proposed this year, and 3% of that was policing, and the rest of our budget's 2%. We managed through this with 2%, and I'm not at that table. I don't know where their costs are. It's concerning that it was 10%, probably 15 years ago. It's 20% of our budget. We participate in recreation, waste, and that's basically it. So our chunk of administration that we pay is really for 2 services.
Councillor Payne?
Can I just get a better understanding, and I'm not sure if you would know this, CFO Jury, but when we talk about the Nelson budget, we talk about a percentage and how that affects the individual average household. Do you have any idea what that number is with the RDCK's increase?
Yeah, I mean, so theirs is about 20% of the overall. Ours is 50%. So I guess if I was better at math, I could probably do that in my head, but it kind of gives you an idea of the, relative amount, I suppose, right?
I'll do some math. I'm not as fast as Kate.
I'm terrible at arithmetic.
Yeah.
So I just because this is going to be going out to the public and there's going to be some messaging around this, I'd like to just be very clear in my understanding, because I do not want to spread any misinformation here. So the process, there was a 4%.
Yeah, 4.8.
4.8.
Yep.
And that was the increase at the time of the
Open house.
open house.
Correct.
Post open house, it climbed to 7, and it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong here, it sounds like that increase went to reserves. It was primarily like, well, we need to add more to the reserves, let's dump that there. And I don't, to pick up on something Mayor Morrison was saying, we may not expect to see it year over year, maybe for the next 2 or 3 years, but that reserve then becomes available on an election year as a padding, just to kind of tie all the threads together. Do I have that wrong?
Yeah.
Anything in that?
Actually,
Yeah.
it's not all to reserves, right?
Well, quite a large portion was. I got a breakdown of what that change was between the open house budget and the final, and the increase to reserves was substantial for that service, from 258,000 to 721,000 was the change in the contribution to reserves in S100. So it's a pretty big jump. But the idea being that, yes, when you get a full year probably of those wages impacting in 2024 and 2025, then maybe they can reduce the impact on future year taxes. That would be my assumption of
Right.
why you would do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Councilor Page, do you have anything to add to that picture? No?
It wasn't part of the board discussion.
Okay.
I'm recalling the conversations we had, and it's not a part of the conversations I remember having at the board when we were doing that final budgetary. We went through, there were adjustments, of course, but yeah,
Okay.
I don't have anything further to add.
And I don't know if that's usual. Is that, Mayor Morrison, is that normal for so you have the open house? In my mind, I would have thought that's kind of when it's pretty locked down. That's what you're presenting to the public. That's where they have time to offer input. And then to have a jump after that open house seems strange.
Yeah.
But Mayor Morrison.
So
But
I'll just address the process there. I mean, because it's Keith's first time. I'm sure he has something to say about the process as well. But this year when I talked to Stuart, he was saying, well, it was a, new election year. We got behind on the budget. We weren't on top of it. And so budgeting took longer. And what happens is because they do so many of these budget meetings, whereas we're fortunate enough that we just do the one, which is this Thursday. They do several. I think they do maybe 9 budget presentations because they sort of do them just like it's Nelson E and F, and then there's kind of like Caslow and D, and then there's East Shore, and so there's a number of budget presentations. Some of them do take place before the 2 sort of what I'll refer to as main budget meetings that are held by the regional district. And if I'm not mistaken, this is where I don't have a calendar in front of me to tell you, is I believe the last budget meeting happened after we had our presentation. I think that ours was like on a Wednesday or Thursday. I attended. Nobody else attended from Nelson, but I attended. And then I think there was one more budget meeting, which was the one where there was a number of people that were added to the payroll. And then, of course, that was then we had another regional district meeting after that, where we heard that the regional district number, recreation number that we had landed on was also going to be increasing as a result of the fact that people get hired and then they get costed out to the services that they support. So so it's just a bit different, Chair Lockenberg, in terms of how that gets done. So
Okay.
And
helps, thanks.
in the presentation, their open house, it did say, 4.8, and there was a slide there that said that it was anticipated that there'd be an additional 2% once you factored in the new staff. So it was communicated at that time, it just wasn't in their actual budget that they showed.
Okay, great. That's very helpful.
So just, so over 4 years, it's, taxation to city residents have gone up from 3.9 million to 4.9, which is 26% over that 4-year period, or 6.5% per year. And I think that's just concerning that we keep seeing this. And Councillor Page, I would just, I know they have this formula of allocating some of these costs based on computers and people, et cetera, which I get on one hand. But if you actually look how much is actually of IT time is allocated to recreation, and this was probably 5 or 6 years ago, or even longer, I said, well, that means they have a full-time IT person. Do they have a full-time IT person? Now I bet you they have 3 full-time IT people, and if they do, then that's fair. But I think sometimes have to go back. Okay, what does that equate to, and is that service getting 3 full-time IT people, if that's what it adds up to, right? So sometimes, or do they get 3 full-time HR people? Because sometimes these formulas, once you play them through, I think you need to step back sometimes and say, okay, does this actually make sense at the end of the day? Or is the recreation tying up 3 full-time HR people? If they are, then fair enough. But if they're not, they're getting 1.5 people and they're paying for 3, then a bit of saying maybe we need to relook at some of these
At the allocation from
formulas.
S100, yeah. No, I think we all agree that there's a conversation that needs to be had around the S100 allocations and the pieces of the budget that also come and impact on that, and why and what the policies around those pieces are. We've had those conversations around the planning components with the invasive species societies conversation. So it's salient for sure.
Councillor Tate.
Okay, through the chair, but to you. So I'm new. So suppose a budget comes forward, and because we get our budgets too, and I don't it's not my place to pick it apart and be like, well, so-and-so costs $45,000 a year and so-and-so costs this, and that gets up. So as our representative there, what opportunity does Keith have to present our concerns without overstepping getting into the operations part of it? So how can we go about saying, hey, 26% over 6 years feels like a lot, 4 years feels like a lot. Then what? How do we ask Councillor Page to support that line of questioning. Like, I don't know what we can do as a governing body to like ask folks to dial back on the increases. Is that a you question? Is that a Kevin question?
Well, we can ask for a service review of S100
Okay.
on the mechanics.
That's,
We also, we had the last board meeting, it's here in part of my notes, we had a pretty robust discussion around the ask coming in from IT for new hardware, which clocked in at $100,000 worth of network equipment. We pushed back fairly hard against the ask, given that the majority of that equipment was absolutely the top of the line within its category, and whether or not that was, and it was from a consultant down in Vancouver that had provided the quoting, and there was a robust discussion on whether or not we had the right eyes to understand that that was in fact the need, and the need given the lifespan, because of course a big part of that report was we need to replace this because our stuff's coming end of life is 5 years. So does this particular set of equipment capture, is it right sized to what we will be needing for the next 5 years versus right sized for what might be needed well beyond 5 years? And that's a piece, because we have a new CFO. That CFO is going through his first budgetary year this year. We have this additional complication, as Morrison pointed out, of having to do these 9 different budgets, and that at the same time running the IT department, much like Nathan does here. And so I think there's some opportunity there as people get more solidified in their roles to bring some of these costs in controls. But we are pushing back against those kind of capital spends, and especially those kinds of capital spends post budgetary pieces, because of course that's really an ask, that where does it sit inside of a 5-year plan for infrastructure around IT, not something that drops after we're literally passing a budget and then we're like, oh, and also $100,000 worth of.
Are you allowed to do that?
Yeah.
And also
Oh.
after the budget?
Well, you're always amending the budget. Yes, you are. You're allowed to, but it bears the question of, and the comment at the time was again back to staff capacity and the ability to get those pieces done and shipped in time to meet the board deadlines to be on the conversations beforehand. But it also speaks to, if this needs to live inside of a 5-year plan, you need to be replacing certain amounts of equipment every year on an ongoing basis so you can nail that down, and you're always refreshing the stuff that's most outdated. But I think they're at a space right now where they're still building leadership capacity. I'm sure other people have other opinions, but it seems to be my take on it right now. Yev has been in that role 7 months? Something like that?
Right, yeah.
So we can, we'll certainly sit down and ask some of those questions when this increase came up. I asked Chris to reach out to their CFO and find out what happened, between when this original budget, which we understood was the impact on the city and this higher amount. So, well, from a staff level, we'll certainly sit down and we can have those more detailed conversations about, why, we just want, we want to make sure, this formula does make sense. How many, what does that look like? What is that formula? How many staff does that look, equate to, or some other things? Because, they've been really good at working with us around some of those things. So,
Well, and I might suggest, when you're looking at that formula and how it petitions out into things like the GIS service, like, do we count a workstation at the same level as a server? And therefore, when we're looking at some of the underlying infrastructure, much like the water system, there's a certain standing cost of just having the network available and maintaining it to a high degree. And this $100,000 for network equipment is a piece asking for that. My concern at the table is it didn't seem like it was going to be the piece that then was the only ask, because it just seemed like it was setting the stage for then the other pieces that would also need to be replaced So I am really worried that they're spending too much money up front on the stuff in the data center, and then they're going to have to come through to achieve the goals of zero trust networking, that they'll have to have the goals of then replacing a whole bunch of other things out in the tendrils of the network. And I'd rather they spent less in the center itself and spread that money further, or had a very robust 5-year plan of what this replacement will look like over time. Because that also gives you the opportunity to try to replace some of the pieces of equipment and look very specifically at what you're doing when you're grabbing a whole bunch of equipment at once and saying, and you want to, when you do that, you can tend to end up in a place of oversizing, because you definitely don't want to undersize something. But if you can do stuff incrementally, you can really focus in on, like, we're going to fix this. How does that impact the performance? Great. That's exactly what we need. Okay, let's go to the next layer out. I just don't want them to rush through it. And I know, like, hiring the new staff that they need, they definitely need to do two things, which is look closely at how much their skills align with the workload they have today, and also make sure that the hiring is positioning themselves for the skills they'll need in the future. And they have to have a hard look at that, and having Yev coming up in the wings, that's just one more of his big mental pieces he has to do on top of being the CFO, which is also a very big mental piece to put into place in an organization that we've all expressed concerns about in terms of its cost controls. So I think these are the kinds of things that, yeah, we have to keep on and keep turning the ship.
Before I go to Councillor Tate, I'm just going to put this out there now. More of a question, maybe the beginning of weighing the pros and cons of asking for a service review at S100. I think there's some value in the conversation, starting the conversation, because when Councillor Page goes back to that table, he can communicate to them that council's concerned and are aware that one of their the tools they have to sort of get clarity and to express concern about how this service is being managed and how those costs are being apportioned out to the other services is through a service review. I'm not suggesting we do it, but I think it's useful to start that conversation and then communicate that conversation has started. So I'd like to hear a little bit, because we do have time and we need to fill up the meeting. But also, it would be interesting for me to hear some pros and cons on that. But before that, Councillor Tate?
No, keep doing what you're doing.
Okay.
I would suggest, if that was the direction council wants to go into, that we have discussions with our municipal partners and see if those concerns align in the same fashion. Like, does Castlegar want to go in the same, like, we all have this kind of shared perspective between Creston and Castlegar, and so I would be touching base with ours on a staff level and also on a director level to see if they want to go in this direction. And we have a bit of a consortium, a cohort of people who would like to see some changes, and then press it in that fashion before we get to a service review level, but see amongst the three of us across the three sisters what are those shared pieces we think we need to see changed. And it might be stuff that can certainly be addressed on a staffing level and through a policy change, and there might be other things that there'll be a wall, and we'll have to go to the mat with it. But for now, I think we probably want to get clarity with Castlegar and Creston as to what they also are seeing as shared sticking points, and then press those issues together.
Mm-hmm. Mayor Morrison, did you have something?
No, Castlegar has gone down this road once before in a bit of a way, and maybe Kevin can just update everybody there in the room about, because they did ask for a review, and I think their review pertained to S100. I'm not sure. It was a number of years ago. I mean, I think we need to keep for sure thinking about this in our minds, but also keeping in mind that, a person that only had a 10% stake in the recreation called for a service review, and it took us the whole last term to even get close to finalizing the review of recreation. So, and then really, and is it just S100, or I have great concerns about waste management, which is probably expanding in leaps and bounds. They hired, Councillor Page, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think 3 more people were hired in waste, so or resource recovery. So again, that's another one where we spend quite a bit of money that we might want to be also looking at. Is this good value for the money that we spend if we're going to start looking at what needs to maybe be reviewed in terms of our relationship with the regional district?
Yeah, as I mentioned, we're really into services, significant services, waste and recreation. I just noticed Castlegar is, 250,000 a year in waste, and we're 1.5 million in waste. So it's, I know central, the central site has some of those costs, but it just seems, out of balance what the cost in central waste is versus west waste. So I'm not sure exactly what all those drivers are, but it's a substantial difference there, and that really is the huge difference in recreation or in requisition between Castlegar and Nelson on a per capita basis. Castlegar did do had a service review on administration a number of years ago. It's probably 15 years ago now, and I think they did negotiate some changes. I think that's when we saw more of those costs being charged out to rural admin versus general admin. So they certainly have done some of that over time. I think it's just the growth of the cost. Wherever you allocate it, there's still costs at the end of the day. I think that's the biggest challenge. And different regional districts operate differently. The RDEK doesn't provide a lot of services, where this one seems to provide a ton of services, and that just growth seems to, I just don't know how it seems to impact the larger municipalities, even though you're not participating in a lot of services. So I don't know if it's, once you start to kind of build this bureaucracy, and then there's core costs, as Councillor Page said, your IT systems, your HR systems, your other things, all those things start to get more and more expensive. And again, each RD is differently. For in the RDEK, I don't think they run a lot of rec centers. Cranbrook runs their rec centers. I think Kimberley runs their own recreation, so that makes a difference as well. I think Cranbrook runs their own landfill as well, so it it can be quite different between regional districts, and that they're really hard to compare because they provide quite different services. But like, what does that look like? It just seems to keep growing, and and at some point you say, no, we're just going to focus on this part and do this part well, or it's easy to kind of end up just taking more and more on. And I know they've pushed back on water systems and other things, but I think that having that overall look, what is our what is the core services we're going to provide, what staffing, what infrastructure do we need to do that, and maybe we need to pause growing to just consolidate what we're doing and really get a handle on some of these large services like waste and recreation.
Well, and just to be clear, the 25% increase over 4 years, you can attribute that to inflation. So I think that's a concern that I have. The second thing is the perception, whether it's real or not, that increasingly S100 just sort of absorbs. It's the place to put something. If you don't know where to put it in S100, and the city of Nelson picking up the biggest share of that is easier politically to do that. And again, that's a perception, and that I've heard. I have no idea if that's true or not. It would be great to at least, we've talked about a service review here today. Whether or not we go ahead with it is completely in the future, but I think Councillor Page is enough from this conversation, I hope, and even just the fact that a conversation about a service review happened is something that you could mention if it happened to help in your conversations at that table.
One other kind of similar question. So I've been curious about the fire trucks on Victoria Street. There's like red fire truck. Is that Victoria in front of the WCB building?
Yeah.
So those aren't City of Nelson fire trucks?
No.
What, can you tell me tell me all about that? Because they're in parking spots and people just love their parking spots. So I'm curious.
They're
So that is where their emergency management department
Who's they?
runs.
In the
The
pink building,
RDCK.
right? Yeah.
In the pink building.
That's
in-
their emergency
in the pink building.
management
Okay.
department leases space in the pink building, and that's where their operations are, including their EOC.
Does that include the parking spots over by WCB, that workers building?
No, they're parking on the street, you mean, right? In
Yeah.
meters?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're angle parking. They're large.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I know we negotiated something in the past.
Mm.
Do you know where that's at?
Precious
Yeah,
downtown
I know,
parking.
yeah.
Just curious.
I'm not sure what you're referring to, but
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, no, when Colin was here, they,
Yeah.
you know, because they were parking right in front of the building. We said, no, you can't park there, and I think they negotiated some spots, 2 or 3 spots, that they could, and I don't know if we ended up charging them for those or not, but, Chris can look into that
I
further.
don't believe so, no.
Okay.
Anything else?
No, unless, Sarah, do you want to give any update on the strategic planning session?
As you all know, we're having, our strategic planning session is scheduled for May 17th, 18th, and 19th. We'll be doing it here in Nelson, and Linda Adams is going to be the facilitator. We've been working with her to sort of organize what the plan is and how it's going to unfold. She'll be spending some time with council in isolation, I guess, and then spending some time with staff, senior staff, and council together. And then, yeah, working through a plan together. I think that's anything. Oh, we'll be doing she'll be sending out a survey, a pre-survey, and we are also going to be doing a thought exchange. And that could look like 1 or 2 questions on the thought exchange or using thought exchange. And it's really an opportunity for us to kind of dig deep and see what the community is hoping for so that we can share that with you.
Oh, interesting.
Cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, so Mayor Morrison might want to jump in, but I think basically the structure is, for council meet with the facilitator on that first night and really talk about those broader goals, that are there existing, or that you want to, what are those broader pieces you want to see happen over the 3.5 years you're still here. And so if you think of our current strategic plan, those are, what's our overarching goals. So I think that's the intent. What are these overarching goals? And then meet with staff. What are those more specific things to move those larger goals forward that council would like to see happen, and staff will be able to talk about where we're at with some of those things. If they're totally new things, obviously, what are we doing now that would move those forwards, or what would we have to park to to move some of these things forward. So the idea is to to identify those larger things, then talk about more specifics of how we advance those. And I think Linda's looking at having that initial discussion with council and staff, and then maybe to understand what those more specific things that council would want to move forward, and then maybe having a session with us with staff to say, okay, what are the more specific things that would need to go, how do they fit in with everything else we're doing? So then we come back together and say, okay, here's if you want to move these things forward, you want these strategies, here's kind of how we'd be thinking of how we could make that work.
Councillor Payne?
I am very curious why Thought Exchange is our go-to engagement tool.
Well, we've been working with them for a while. They're obviously a local software company, and they approached the city a number of years ago,
2018.
2018, to have us on board as a municipal part of their things. We believe we used it in the past as a very effective tool. It's way different than a survey, where a survey is, we make up, do you like X or Y, and you say yes or no, whereas Thought Exchange is really about engaging whoever. Most of the time it's the community around, that broader question, and in this case, I think our question is more around, council going into strategic priorities, what things do you believe that council should be looking at as part of that session? So it's, it's that open-ended question, I guess, is the power of it. And it also has, these analytical tools, so it can say, everybody, you might disagree on whatever one thing, but you all agree that that being more active is important, whether it's for climate change or for health, for lifestyle or whatever. It starts to find those commonalities that you can get the community behind, and not get stuck in we said, do you believe in climate change, and you might have people on either side of that, but it tries to find, okay, everybody believes we should reduce our, amount of time we drive or whatever. So that's the power of it. So hopefully that helps.
I get that. I love open-ended questions.
Yeah.
Obviously leads to more creativity and more thinking outside of the box.
Yeah.
I do find it's it's targeted at a limited demographic. And I'd be interested to see their statistics around what demographic they're reaching. Because I think it's pretty niche, I guess is what I would say, without understanding more. So can we use more than one tool to engage? I know the time is somewhat limited. I don't know what tools are often used. I don't know that a survey is it, but I'd be interested in other ways that we could get a broader scope.
Are you thinking like offline tools or a different online tools?
I'm thinking offline tools. I'm interested to know really how many people in our community are able to engage, because I'm thinking of two distinct sectors that are not. And those are citizens that I want to hear from.
Yeah, so we certainly have flagged that as, how do we, not just throw out a question and hope people respond to it, and we get, both limited participation and limited, and exclude people, not on purpose, but just because, as you say, they just don't use that type of tool. So that is on our radar, and whether we can bring it to the question to the senior center and to write in, we'll populate it for you. So we'll look at some things like that of how do we so if councillors have ideas around some of these audiences that we want to attract, do we go to the the college, do we go to the schools, do we go to some other places where they certainly could use the technology, but are they using would they respond without some prompt or nudge or that sort of thing? So we'll, and it does, part of it does allow you to ask demographic questions. So we certainly, and again, that's the power of the software. You can say everybody, all us baby boomers, have this inclination or whatever, and or whatever, right? So you can, that is another power of it. It can start to, pick up those patterns of different demographics. And if it depends what questions we ask to identify those.
Yeah, so would we know in past thought exchanges that we've done what demographics
Yep.
we've hit?
Yep.
Because that would be
Yeah,
interesting to me to understand.
Yeah, for example, we did quite a bit of work around the pilots on the organic diversion, and I think we had a pretty strong cross-section of folks
Okay.
on something like that.
If I'm not mistaken, the most underrepresented group in the community would be like high school students or 20-somethings. And so luckily Thought Exchange might work really well for them if we engaged LV and Selkirk and talked to the teachers and said, hey, could you maybe dedicate one class to getting everybody to play around with this tool or this thing?
Yeah, so certainly things like that, because what is our strategic plan for? Well, it's for future generations.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing right here, right? We're planning for future generations. So without that input,
And
I
high
don't know
school-
how valid.
I think a high school teacher might appreciate the connection and the opportunity to do something in a civics class that actually will have an effect.
Yeah.
Like, clearly would have an effect.
That'd be great.
Any opportunity for outreach, I know that we have spoken to
Yes.
excitedly
Door to
about
door.
going
Kate
out
and I are there, yeah.
and being present whenever we are state sanctioned to do so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's it from Sarah on the strategic. It sounds like that's it from you. I think we'll go to the council reports. We've got a half hour. And I'm looking at Councillor Page in particular, but anybody else have a council report? Councillor Payne, you do?
I do.
I have a mini one if I... Well, how about we start, we'll go with Councillor Pinheiro, then Councillor Payne, and then we'll end with Councillor Page.
Okay, so just an update from the library board meeting on March 21st, and not really much there, but they are excited about a new collection they've got. It's called, it's new. It's new technology that I had when I was 9. It's called.
You're only 10.
It's called Vox Box, and it's basically a book that speaks to you. But I had one. It was the Star Wars one, and I remember it. And so it's not that new, but they're very cool, and it is a little more complicated than one that I had. So they're getting a bunch of those in. Their Tech Hub training is ongoing until April. So if you have any curiosity about what goes on at the Tech Hub, they do have a lot of different things going on in there, and it's quite well-rounded and also quite confusing for some people. So there are, keep an ear out, and you can look to the library for future offerings there, but it is ongoing.
And just is that the end of April, or because it's almost
It is
April?
almost until April, yeah, it is. So that, I'm not sure. That
Okay.
just says till April, so that's soon. But
Another month.
I think the other end of that is that, like, I went in because I'd found some sort of VHS tape that had a fight of mine on it that I hadn't been able to watch in 15 years. And so I went in to get it switched over, and it wasn't a Tech Hub training day, it was just a day, and somebody did show me. So I guess apart from that, people at the library are quite nice, and they're willing to do all sorts of things.
That is true.
And they have a new, they got grant funded, so they're gonna be now expanding their outreach service to Area E once a week, and that is not costing us any money apparently, but is an expansion of service. So that's new and exciting at the library, and that's about it.
Is there any sense of how the library is going to respond to the AI explosion, particularly ChatGPT and other LLMs like that?
It's a good question. It didn't come up in the last meeting,
Okay.
but I can, that's a good question to ask.
Yeah. I was curious when I was thinking about it. I read something from the library and I was thinking like, wow, it's disruptive all over the place, but I wonder profoundly disruptive potentially for the library.
Yeah,
Like, so I'd just be
no
curious,
kidding.
but okay.
I think, you can That's kind of crazy, that stuff.
Yeah.
It's disruptive for universities, I imagine, as well.
It's exciting.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Disruption is exciting.
The end of
Yeah.
the end
It's
of
awesome.
scholarship
Profound.
as we know it, sort of.
I know our IT folks are
Explosion of.
quite concerned about that AI software and, some of the fraud that's already happening because of
100%.
it.
Fraud's increasing.
It can, I guess, learn your voice and phone up your secretary and ask them to write you a check. And
Wow.
yeah, it's a bit scary.
And when it fails, it can
Disruptive.
learn from that failed interaction and
Yeah.
learn the next voice and try again.
Yeah.
And again.
Yeah, Terminator 2 comes to mind.
For your credit card.
Councillor Payne.
Lots of excitement. The Housing Committee met after our last meeting, and we actually saw the presentation from Macola about the housing entities that we'll be seeing tonight. So lots of enthusiastic response from that as we decide what's going to go forward. And our next meeting, we'll be working around clarification on what the mandate of the Housing Committee is and whether we need to bring that forward to do some work on the bylaw that actually created that committee to, I guess, make sure it's really collaborative with whatever the entity we decide on moves forward. The second thing I did in housing, well, I attended the Columbia Institute's Higher Ground conference that happened last weekend. It was at Harrison Hot Springs. I was not in Harrison. I was online watching the plenary sessions, but there was an excellent session on the role of local government in municipal housing, which I think everyone here and the more experienced people have seen that role shift fairly dramatically over the last few years as the housing crisis has exacerbated the situation for people in all of our communities. So housing is hot, and next week I'm attending the UBCM Housing Summit in Vancouver with Councillor Page and a number of individuals. I know Nelson Cares is sending a couple of representatives as well. So I think that'll be a pretty incredible opportunity to find out which direction the government will be assisting us in as we move forward to whatever entity we decide is our next step with Macola. And the I did two sort of fun things that I'll just report on, but the Hume celebrated their 125th anniversary, and I heard Ryan Martin tell the story of how the Hume became the Hume instead of the Heritage, which he had the $20,000 sign for. And it was a high tea for seniors, and as the only senior on council, I felt I should show up, and wow, was I glad I did. They put an incredible spread on. It was pretty amazing, so all of you can only aspire to be seniors to celebrate the next time they have an event like that. I also attended last week the Nelson Community Food Cupboard's first post-COVID community dinner, which is a regular event that they have. They have their new kitchen. It was spectacular. The menu was amazing. And they were just really, really excited to be back in that space and welcoming the community. So I would definitely encourage anyone else on council who might be interested just to see that facility if you haven't toured it yet, and go to the community dinner. I'm sorry I don't have the exact date, but it is in June, so I will alert you to it. But it's a great opportunity just to sit at communal tables and talk to a wide variety of people, whether they're clients that come to for the food services, or volunteers that work there, or newcomers in our community as well, is who I sat with, and it was really a great experience. So those are just a couple of the things that I've been doing in the last 2 weeks. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Payne. And Councillor Page, before I go to you, I just wanted to, just give me 1 second. Okay, Councillor Page.
Okay, so we had our joint resource recovery meeting, finalized budgets for East, West, and Central Services. We've already had discussions about those impacts. The biggest thing I think I'd pick out of the RDCK board meeting last week, or 2 weeks ago now, is the Kootenay Improvement District has gotten a new board, and the RDCK will administer a grant coming from the province to do the reorganization. That's an improvement district out in Area F, I believe, and they had,
Nisukin?
yeah, and they had, it's
Sukin.
mostly driving a water system. Sorry? But it was a pretty big deal that they had basically gotten to in a position where no one would run for the board. They had no governance structure, but that has been resolved. Otherwise, the business of the RDCK board was mostly just approvals of memberships to committees, acceptance of finalizations of budgets, and there wasn't any big strong acts aside from what I already mentioned around the backbone equipment upgrades for IT and the cost implications of that and the scale of those products, which I already spoke to. We had a hospital district board meeting on the 22nd. We approved the capital budgets. The biggest ask coming out of the capital budgets really is the driver there for that tax increase is the Nelson Health Campus and the build out that's going on with that. There's a $7.5 million ask coming, and $4.9 million of it is coming from reserves, which have been built out over time. And typically that ask is about double what it usually is, but I think something like 2.4 million, if I recall the number correctly, is going towards the Nelson Health Campus.
Great, thank you. Mayor Morrison, do you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Chair Lautenberg. Given that I'm trying to be away on vacation, I don't have much to report. I have had some conversations with the Nelson Leafs recycling depot about some initiatives that might be occurring in the next few months. And I can't go, probably any discussion of that needs to be in camera, but it's could be interesting there. And of course, I've had a couple of telephone conversations and quick conversations while I've been away with Interior Health about a number of initiatives around Nelson. And I actually had a very enjoyable day today, actually at a brand new climbing facility as I try to get my mind organized around climbing, and I'm looking forward to tonight's presentation from our climbing group. So that was really thrilling. I spent about maybe an hour or an hour and a half in this brand new facility that's just a year old. So it being in that really got me excited about what the potential for Nelson could be going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mayor. So without any further, I'm assuming Councillor Woodward does not have anything, so we'll adjourn this portion of the meeting. Sorry, we will be recessing until 7 o'clock. And a motion to recess, Councillor Page, Councillor Payne, all in favor? Thank you, we are recessed.
Can I ask one question? I'm going to sign off. Do I sign back in on this same? Am I signing back in?
Yes, yeah,
And
same
the same
one,
sign-in?
same link, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
See you at 7. We did it, Councillor Page. We broke the Harrison curse. Is that what it is?
Parkinson's.
That could be part of our strategic.
I would love it. Yeah, it's on the list.
And with more of a preamble.
My list is long. I just don't know.
It's about reinforcement.
It's not.
And it's actually
There's
written,
clear
on
consent
paper
sometimes
with
that you've
pencil
said.
in cursive. I know this is not AI, but this is LI, Leslie's intelligence.
I'm still writing cursive too.
It's fine. So many people don't even know how to do it though now.
I know.
It's
Good
really
to know.
interesting. Noticeably had their Instagram going saying that, come on in and practice your cursive. And I'm like, whoa, write a letter. And I'm like, that's interesting.
haven't
As well.
But those are also learned behaviors from the previous term, right?
Beautiful
Right,
cursive.
where everybody needs to have a voice.
Well, we do
a
have,
voice
you know,
that's
all
heard.
those incredible
Me too,
scripts and fonts that Microsoft has
So you're saying
developed,
my
plus all
anxious
their
attachment style is a
artistic,
play?
Oh, yeah.
more fonts than you could ever imagine.
Interesting.
Ooh, I feel. Oh, I must be the loudest because it's pointing
Did you
at
turn
me.
your nameplate?
Right. All right, we're gonna get started. We're recording, and we've got Mayor Morrison, isn't it? Okay. All right, we're gonna be returning from our recess, and I'd like a motion to
Reconvene.
reconvene. Thank you, Councilor Pace. Motion to
Move, so
reconvene.
moved.
Nope.
Didn't you move it?
Did you move it?
Yep.
Oh, second?
Second.
Okay. And all in favor? Thank you. So, hi, everybody. I am acting mayor today, Councilor Rick Lochtenberg, and Councilor Morrison will be returning at our next business meeting on Tuesday, the 11th. We're going to start this session with a cultural presentation. Everybody's favorite part of the Committee of the Wholes. And I'm going to be introducing Pat Henman, who's going to come forward. And I've got a short blurb to get you started, Pat. So on a Sunday afternoon in June 2013, performer and singer Pat Henman was driving home on the highway to Nelson, BC from Calgary with her 19-year-old daughter, Maya, when they were struck head-on by a drunk driver. Although both survived, their physical injuries still remain, and the emotional toll on their well-being and that of their family has become a story that inspired Pat to share in the only way she knew how, on stage, with songs that expresses the intensity and the joy of a life-changing event. Part storytelling, part concert, Pat tells the story of trauma and recovery in this unique and passionate one-act drama with music, while embracing the many colors of survival presented on stage with her words. Pat.
Should I just be here?
Yeah, and the mic is gonna.
Be maybe there.
This works, doesn't it?
Sure, if we can get you mic'd.
Here, can we move the mics over so that it's around mic?
I'm standing for the whole thing,
Are you?
so
So
I
you
could
speak
be
into that?
in.
Yeah, and I can move the chair.
Does that work? That kind of works, I guess. You get the front row seat.
Pat, just hold on a sec, though. We want to get the camera on you.
Yes?
Yep, you could.
Well, thank you all for having me here tonight. I am just going to do a little 5-minute clip from the show based on my memoir, and thank you for reading that intro, Jesse. Imagine that there is a soprano voice behind me somewhere in the ether as I do this piece. I am lying in a narrow hospital bed. But am I awake? I don't know. Just that I am at peace. I hear a voice. It seems to be coming from behind me, but I can see the scene in front of me. The voice belongs to a faceless woman who stands beside a magnificent cherry tree in full bloom. A twisted wooden arbor arches over a small wooden bench upon which sit 3 more people. All 4 are staring at me, looking straight at me. The woman with the soprano voice. She has dark, curly, shoulder-length hair. All four are featureless. But they are there for me. Their song is for me. And I feel safe. And it soothes me. Now what am I seeing? A gurney? Who's on it? Is that me? This looks like a hospital hallway. Am I dreaming about a hospital? About a body on a gurney being pushed very fast? I hear an amplified voice. Code blue. Code blue? Oh, I see someone performing what looks like CPR on that body on the gurney. They rush through large double doors into a bright room. I managed to squeeze in as if hovering on a cloud. Oh. People are running around, yelling directions, hooking machines up to this body. Oh, I see a surgeon. She's putting on gloves and a mask. Oh, blackness again. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. And Pat, when are you going to be performing at?
I'm sorry.
You're going to be performing at the Capitol.
I'm not at the Capitol.
Sorry.
I'm at the Tagum Hall
Okay.
on April 6th.
Okay.
It's a 5-city-town tour. We start in Caslow on this Thursday, and then we go to Golden on Saturday, and then we are at Tagum next Thursday, that's April 6th. Then we go to Calgary on April 8th, and then we are in Creston on April 14th. Yes, I'm using this time also, well, not your time, but time in the communities to talk about the new legislation that we are advocating for with MAD. I'm one of the advocators. I've met with some, the MP for Transportation, the actual opposition. I met with him last week, and we are looking at the anti-impaired technology that the US has already passed. So part of my job as a performer and going out into the communities with this is to enlighten, encourage people to go to their MPs, give them more information on this new anti-impaired technology, which is basically more through touch, through the steering wheel, and through ambience, through the breath, that the car will not start if the driver has been drinking, and it won't affect other people in the car. The car just won't start. So we're hoping, the States is saying they're gonna have it by 2035 in all new vehicles. So let's hope that we can maybe match them. So that's part of my mission, to bring this show out on the road. And a little bit of entertainment, even though I know it might not seem to be, but it is. And the music is great, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
That's beautiful.
I'm sure it's going to be beautiful, yeah. Thanks, Pat. Okay, now we're moving to the public participation, and I'm going to see if there's anybody in our, yep, we do? Okay, great. So I'm going to read a little note first, and then, okay. So public participation period is limited to 15 minutes in total. A speaker may only address council once for a maximum of 3 minutes unless authorized otherwise by unanimous vote of council members present. Speakers must restrict their remarks to items that are listed on the meeting agenda. Speakers must not address council regarding a matter for which a public hearing must be held or has been held prior to council's consideration of the matter or adoption of the bylaw. Speakers must not address council regarding a permit for which public notice must be given or has been given prior to council's consideration of issuance of the permit. Finally, speakers shall address all comments through the mayor or presiding member. Jess, come have a seat and let us know who you are.
But it's something
I-
you have mentioned at council in the past.
Yeah, I think we're good. I think we're good.
Is it on?
There's a button.
Oh, is it on?
I think holds.
I'll have to hold it.
No.
Fuck. Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Jess Chant, and I'm here as the Executive Director of the Nelson Community Food Center. I know you've seen me quite a bit in the past month. And that's located at 602 Silica Street in Nelson. And I'm here to inform council about a meeting that 5 food access providers in town had on March 16th in response to the impending closure of the Salvation Army's Hot Meals program. And the meeting included representatives from the Salvation Army, the Hub, St. Saviour's Food Pantry, Our Daily Bread, and the Nelson Community Food Center. And it was the first time that all food access providers in Nelson have been together in the past 3 years. We shared how we all serve Nelson and provide emergency food access for those who are most in need of our services. And it was apparent from our discussion that through our combined efforts, we cover food access for every day of the week in Nelson, including stat holidays. We talked about how so many people in Nelson are hungry, period. And that's why I wanted to come to council and report on it. We've seen a really high increase in numbers over the last 8 months across all food access providers. And the closure of the Hot Meals program at the Salvation Army greatly reduces the service. And it means that there's no food access program available Monday to Friday until Our Daily Bread opens at 11:30 a.m. So there's a gap. It was also really apparent from the discussion that the food center is the only organization that has any capacity to explore addressing the gap. And we're committed at NCFC to exploring a breakfast program 1 time per week, which is not close to the frequency of the Salvation Army's Hot Meals program, which ran or is running until Thursday, Monday to Thursday, from 10 a.m. till noon. And like I said, we're committed to exploring the possibility of running the breakfast program 1 time per week. But we know that we're not located on Baker or Vernon Street. We're off the main drag, we're up a hill, and we recognize that that might be a barrier for some folks to attend. So we recognize we might not actually be able to fill the gap for the specific people who are going to the Hot Meals program. But we also know that there are a very large number of hungry folks in town and we might attract a different clientele to a breakfast program. We're willing to explore it, and we're willing to pilot something so that folks can have food access before 11:30 a.m. on any given weekday. We really just wanted to report back about the meeting. It was significant for us, and wanted to report that the same group's going to meet in mid-May, and we're all monitoring the impact of the Hot Meals program closure on all of our programs. The Salvation Army is officially directing people to Our Daily Bread. But we know there could be overflow. We also know that folks just might go hungry until they're able to access the service of their choice. So I wanted to let you know that we'll be meeting in mid-May. We will report back on our progress and what arises out of these discussions. But we recognize as a group that it's a really significant time for food access in Nelson, and wanted to keep you informed. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions for Jess? We have a few moments. Nope. Okay. Jess, thank you for that. And you're saying you're going to report back to us in May?
We're meeting in mid-May.
Okay.
I know that the food center is on the docket. Get ready for the committee of the whole end of June. So
Okay.
we'll at least report back then
Okay.
if we don't come and hijack the mic before then.
Okay. Sounds good.
Great. Thank you.
Can I just ask one thing before you leave the? So if in your meetings, in your your coordination and collaboration around this, if you come up with ideas of ways that the city might be able to facilitate, you'll call us sooner.
Absolutely.
Okay, that'd be great. Out of the box, let's go. Out of the box, I can't get out of the box.
Thank you. Do we have any other public delegates? Okay, seeing none, we'll be moving now to our first delegation, which is the Kootenay Climbing Association. And I think I see Brian and Jamie here. My eyes aren't very good. Yep, Jamie. Okay, come on forward, whoever is going to present. And I think we have a slideshow.
I think I'm on. Yeah. Ready with the preso?
All you have to do is press the arrow to forward it. It's up.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Good evening. I'm Jamie Moy. I'm the Communications Chair for the Kootenay Climbing Association. I'm co-presenting tonight with Brian Hansen, who is the Executive Director of the Kootenay Climbing Association and also the General Manager of the Cube Climbing Gym. I'm going to talk quickly about who we are and some project background for those of you new to the role and or this project. It's a very exciting project happening in the city of Nelson right now, and then Brian's going to get into the good stuff, basically what's happening right now. The Kootenay Climbing Association has 7 board members, and we've got 3 other folks pictured here. That is our expansion committee. We are one of the only nonprofit climbing gyms in Canada. We opened the Cube Climbing Center, and I'm sorry, that's a typo. It was January 2014. We're located in Mary Hall in Selkirk College. We service just about all ages, and we've had over 9,000 individuals walk through our doors since we opened. We've experienced year after year growth in both number of climbers and in revenue since opening, except for a small dip when we had to close during the pandemic. Our biggest growth has been with the youth. So since starting an after-school youth program in 2017, we've grown by over 200%. All this to say, we have outgrown our current facility. And this is just a slide basically showing we're not alone in experiencing this. The sport of climbing has been moving from a fringe sport to a normal fitness modality for about the past decade now, all over North America. We actually got together in March of 2019 to start planning our vision for the Cube 2.0, a facility that was better able to accommodate the demand and both what we were experiencing then and in the future. We hit a major milestone this past summer when the city of Nelson granted us a parcel of land to lease to develop a new facility. And here's where it's at. So it's this yellow square, and that concrete area in front of it, that's the current Mary Hall building at Selkirk. So basically, if you're looking at it, it's just down the hill behind it. All right, now Brian's going to talk about the good stuff.
All right, thanks, Jamie. So the facility that we're currently designing is over 5 times the size of our current space. Of course, we're going to have a lot more climbing surface, but there's a lot more that we can do with that space besides just adding more space for people to climb on. A big one is safe spectator area. So we presently don't have that, and that's great for competitions, but also just for parents when they come in to watch their youth climb. Another really important one is the Kids Adventure Zone. So that's a dedicated kids space for kids to be kids, and they don't have to share that with adult climbers. We're able to expand our programming, both youth and adult. We would still be able to hit that Olympic standard of a 50-foot high rope wall, as well as for bouldering. So bouldering being climbing without ropes, not as high, but still requiring quite a bit of space. We could host competitions at a much higher level than what we presently can, bringing in tourism dollars with that. And an important one for us is being able to use locally sourced building materials, construction, and sustainable design. So we're looking at doing this through mass timber, utilizing those locally sourced materials, as well as our local businesses and talent. And another really important one for us is the state-of-the-art air filtration and HVAC system. So as I'm sure everyone here is aware, with climate change, we're seeing much warmer, drier, smoky summers. And for us to build this space, this is going to be a place that people can recreate safely during those months, as well as just a refuge for the community. Here are just some inspiring photos of what a commercial climbing gym looks like. So on the left-hand side, we've got our kids dedicated zone. On the top right, that's just a really tall rope climbing area, and the bottom is an inspiring bouldering feature. A lot of you have seen this image before when we presented last year. A lot has happened since then. So one of the big ones is our community fundraising for the schematic design. So that was 2 very successful fundraising events that we put on. Also very successful corporate sponsorship campaign. We conducted a community input survey. So we reached out to the community to see what they would like to have in this new structure. We were able to source our vendors mostly through local talent. So that's our architectural, engineering, surveying estimators. And we actually kicked off that schematic design just last month, and that's a $75,000 endeavor. Now, I just want to really stress that these next few photos are all very early stages. Everything's in draft, just to show where we're at presently. So we are working with city planning staff on putting together this building location feasibility. So that's our site plan. We have also a very draft floor plan. So this is setting up our layout so that we meet all of the requirements that the design team for the KCA has, as well as that input that we received from our community survey. And once we get a little bit more closer to that final picture, we're again going to have a public meeting to present this and get more feedback. Really just looking for those golden nuggets that come out when we share this with the public, that, you know, some things that we don't see when we're sitting together in our meetings.
And we're hoping to be at that point by end of summer, early fall.
Once again, just a few more drawings. All right, so this is the good stuff. So once the schematic design is complete, we'll have our cost estimates. And what this will allow us to do is really refine our fundraising plan. So at the moment, that's $1 million by May of 2024. We'll be able to have our final design, so all the final drawings, engineering, architectural, wall design, by December of 2024. That's $300,000. And then raise our additional $4 to $5 million by June of 2025, and hopefully construction beginning in the spring of 2025. Just to share a little bit of the support we've received from the community. So of course, City of Nelson with that leased property. We've received letters of support both for the location at 10th Street, as well as just having a facility like this in Nelson. CBT, Community Development Program Grant, $8,500 towards the schematic design, as well as many local companies. So that's through our corporate sponsorship drive, and a lot more that have offered, you know, prizes for raffles at our next events, in-kind donations, just not included in this image.
I just want to say our corporate sponsorship program for 2023 was our best, most robust ever. So that was exciting.
And also, yeah, for community support. So those 2 successful fundraising events, we have the petition that we presented on last year, so almost 2,000 signatures from Nelson and surrounding area in support of having a facility like this. and that community engagement for design input. So that's a survey that we put out there. We had over 410 responses. And I would like to say that it was not a short survey. This was a pretty lengthy one. So the fact that 410 people took the time to let us know what they would like to see in this facility kind of really shows how much they're interested in it. And yeah, I'd just like to thank you for your time, and I hope this update was informative.
Thank you. So any questions from council? Councillor Payne.
I'm interested in what your, this looks like an amazing and exciting project. You've obviously done a lot of work and you brought a lot of passion and power to this. So fingers crossed. I'm interested to understand what the capacity of the facility would be sort of each day. Like how many people go through this facility and they stay for an hour, a couple hours? Is that, if you can just paint me a little more picture of a something I'm not familiar with.
So presently, our facility, which is 1/5 that size, we'll put somewhere between 80 to 130 people through a day.
30 is our maximum, which we regularly hit at any one time, and we have to turn people away.
Perfect, thanks.
Yeah, so that's not a fire hall capacity. That's just something that we carried forward through COVID. That we felt that that's a safe occupancy for our present space. And yeah, people usually stay for 2 hours. I think my projections in the business plan had us operating somewhere of a max capacity of 90 people or something for this new facility. So yeah, significantly.
Significant improvement. And if I just may follow up, I'm interested in your engagement, one thing that I'm always big on. So when you did your community engagement, is that with your community of climbers, or did you go right out into the broader community, or a little bit of both? Because I'm assuming that the people who answered the long survey in detail were probably people who use the facility and are really committed towards it. What was the neighborhood response to something like this? Did you have anything like that, or just interested in that area?
We
Got a lot of students coming through, I guess, is part of that question.
We definitely were hitting our sort of core members and gym users with that particular survey, talking about climbing gym design. We started opening up more to a general public this year, so we held a Women's Adventure Film Festival just recently, because that's a much broader audience who comes in, where we could talk about the climbing gym and what we were doing with it. And I think that's going to be the same approach we take when we do present our next round of information. It's going to be more open to the general public as well.
Perfect.
Yeah, sure.
It seems to me that it is an activity that has a pretty equitable base, if you want to call it that, your mix of participants, both male, female, men, women, and an age demographic also. Would that be a correct assumption?
Yeah, indoor climbing in particular is almost exactly 50-50 split between men and women, and we see that reflected in our user base as well. And then the age range is incredible. And something that's exciting in the world of climbing too is making indoor climbing more accessible to differently abled people as well. So adaptive climbing is kind of the next area that we're going to have in terms of being able to market to and make available to more people in the community.
Awesome, thanks so much.
Thank you. Oh, Councillor Page.
Thanks. So it looks like you guys are making great progress now that you have a foothold. I know I've asked some tough questions in the past, but hopefully it's always directing us towards a good place for this. One of the questions I have as you move forward is around the provincial and federal grant strategy and the ones you'll be going after, and more specifically when coming and soliciting either RDCK or local or Nelson support, the coordination within the community about which projects will be put forward as a community. So have you guys been thinking about what streams you'll be going after to fund this, and have you been having those discussions with recreation staff specifically about some of those infrastructure grants? And I guess staff here as well, because there's going to be overlaps.
Our expansion committee chair is unfortunately out of the country right now, who is the best person to answer those questions. And we have also engaged the CBT. We're looking to get, we've already been approved for, but we're just working to bring in a facilitator to help us do some fundraising, kind of best practices and workshopping, so we can make sure we're aligned in those ways. We're definitely open to any and all recommendations in that area. This is new territory for all of us on the board, and
Okay.
so we are learning as we go.
Okay.
Do you want to add to that?
No, I think that was great. The one thing that I would add is the only other non-profit climbing gym to pull off something of this magnitude in Canada is
Squamish?
it's in Saanich on the island, and I've had a couple of meetings with their executive director to get input on how they were able to get a lot of the fundraising dollars that they were able to use to build that facility. And yeah, she's been an amazing resource and has provided some useful information to us, but we're quite early in the fundraising stage.
And supplemental if I may, Chair. So in in your timeline, do you guys have a date you're trying to complete this project by, or is this what is our timeline looking like?
It's a little bit of a moving target right now
Yeah.
because we can't start those big federal and provincial grants until we have the schematic design done. So that's kind of our next big bottleneck. But in our overall project timeline, we would love it if we could break ground in 2025. But like I said, a lot of that's kind of vague right now.
And a few months ago, the KCA sat down with a consultant for a strategic planning event to try to put together this timeline and to get a little bit more guidance. And that was also something that came about through the nonprofit advisors program through the CBT.
I guess this is a moving target, so the planning component, should grants not come in a particular year, or there might be multiple asks, or local government might have other priorities for a particular year that therefore needs to consolidate the ask for that particular budgetary season. The fundraising will just continue to go on towards the target until the next bottleneck is overcome, and we see a beautiful Olympic climbing gym in our community in Fairview for generations to come.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Mayor Morrison and then Councillor Tate.
Thank you, Chair Lockhart. So could you just refresh me? I have a couple questions. One is, what are you looking at as the cost for the gym? What's your proposed budget?
There was actually a slide for that, if we could get the presentation.
And I'm sorry, I'm remote, and so I can't. I can't see the slides at the same time because I've got like one computer to do all this work from.
About 5
So
million.
I couldn't see the slides. 5 million. Okay, thank you. 5.6. I'll look at this. Councillor Page is right on his phone shooting me the. Okay, 5.6 million. Thank you. And then the other one is, do you have an affiliation with the? It was just some information that I got today about the Climbing Wall Association, which sounds like an unbelievable group to be affiliated with. I don't know what a membership costs there, but they seem to be the people, at least in the United States, and I'm sure you've heard of them. I'm just wondering whether or not you're sending anybody off to their upcoming May convention, or their annual sort of meeting of everything climbing.
So we are a member of the CWA, and we will not be attending this next one, but I have put it on the budget to hopefully get myself sent to next year's when it's back on the West Coast.
Right. Yeah, I see it's far away. I just was looking at it. It's in, I don't know, Pittsburgh or something. So, okay. No, I think that's I just have to say I was so inspired today. I was at a climbing gym here in Arizona, and it was an astounding facility. And I wish I was 6 again and could go and play in the children's area.
There's so much fun. There's so much fun for all ages.
Yeah. And this was a full on. This wasn't a bouldering club. This was a full on. They have a speed wall there. It was quite an impressive facility. That I think was a little bit out of the price range for Nelson. It was probably a little bit north of, I think around a bit north of 10 million, probably even a bit more, but very, very fascinating. And with the Canadian link, the one of the owners is a Canadian, so interesting.
Nice.
Anyways, thank you for your time, and I'm looking forward to still coming for a climb at the gym that we have operating currently.
All right. Thank you, Mayor Morrison. Councillor Tate and then Paige.
Thank you. I'm excited. I'm always excited to see what the different like micro communities within our big community are doing. It's like that 10,000 is the perfect population because we've never met before. But a couple questions. I don't know the difference in this type of a organization of a nonprofit versus a profit climbing wall. And I think you said that the Boulders in Saanich is a nonprofit as well. So Saanich is like 100,000 people, plus like Victoria is like 100,000 people. So do you see it being sustainable long-term in our little tiny place, or what does that look like?
So the facility that they built, although it's still a nonprofit, it's much larger than what we're proposing.
Oh, okay.
Yes. From my experience, I think with nonprofits, they tend to be a little bit more complicated as you grow in scale. I believe they're over 10 years operating to great success. There's a lot of other very large climbing gyms, all within their kind of same resource pool of customers. For the space that we're proposing to build here, that's something that I'm very confident in that we can sustain.
That's great. Thank you.
All right, Councillor Page.
I'm good.
You're
That
good?
answered.
Okay, so seeing no more questions from council, thank you both very much. We look.
You're so welcome, and thank you for just all your questions and attention and just ongoing support. It means a lot to us.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. Okay, our next delegation is BC Housing, who we have online right now. I'm sorry, I didn't wear my glasses today, so you're going to have to introduce yourselves.
Yeah, no,
Douglas Winter.
no worries. No worries. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for welcoming us here tonight. I'll just introduce myself. Douglas Winter. I'm the development manager for the interior region, one of them, and I'll pass it on to Rachel.
Hi, Mayor and Council. Thanks for having us here tonight. I'm Rachel McGecky. I'm the Supportive Housing Advisor for BC Housing, and I cover the Kootenay Boundary Shuswap area. And over to Tyler.
Thank you very much, Mayor and Council, for having us. I'm Tyler Baker. I'm the Director for Regional Development for the Interior Region.
Great. So we have a slideshow that we would like to walk through our presentation with, and I'm not sure, is it easiest for me to share my screen and we can do it that way?
Yep, we're going to get it up right now. Oh, if you,
Easiest for you to share.
yeah.
Okay. All right, let's do that. Hopefully I get the right screen here, screen 2. And let me see if I can do that. Does that show up okay?
Yep, we can see it.
Beautiful.
Oh, good. That's a good start then. Well, yeah, thanks again for having us. We're really excited to be here to talk about what we've been up to in Nelson and what we hope to continue to do in your community. And I think we just want to speak generally about what BC Housing is about, and but more importantly, to speak to the relationships that we've formed with all of the nonprofits in Nelson and the city, and working with the city and other organizations in the community as well, really with the prime goal to ensure that all the people in Nelson, all of Nelson essentially is housed well. So with that, we'll begin with our land acknowledgement. And so BC Housing acknowledges that we conduct our activities on the homelands of thousands of Indigenous peoples and many nations across British Columbia. Each has their own unique traditions, culture, worldviews, languages, and history. We have much to learn from Indigenous ways of knowing and being in the world, and we are committed to adopting the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada calls to action. So what we do at BC Housing, we essentially are about developing housing for communities across the province, and we manage and administer those housing projects through our nonprofits. We also have a certain portion of our buildings that we've developed ourselves, and we look for nonprofits to come in and operate those directly with our operations team. And it's really a wide range of social housing that we can get into here. So the people we serve are really people who are experiencing homelessness, those with disabilities, Indigenous people and families, women and children at risk of violence, low-income seniors and families, and people who are trying to get into the market as well for the first time. I think the one group in here that may be missing is just those that are sort of low to moderate income individuals that are sort of working and living in our communities as well. And I'll just note our 110,000 plus households across BC that BC Housing has been a part of, and in developing homes for those people. And so this is really where we come to the table, and we realize we can't build our buildings and build housing for the community of Nelson without a great number of partnerships. And so we look to partner primarily with our nonprofits, who are the ones who are working with a wide range of individuals in our community to provide services to them and programs, and really enabling them to be a part of this larger housing spectrum. And of course, without the city and the municipalities across our provinces, we would be unable to, easily develop all the programs and all the buildings that we are looking to implement across the spectrum as well. So we work with health authorities also, the provincial government, and we look to facilitate the coordination with providing financing and rental assistance through those programs. And I'd say also more recently, we've been working with the federal government, with CMHC, in doing more collaboration with their funding, as a funding partner through their co-investment fund. So this, I've touched on here, and this is really the bigger picture of our housing ecosystem, which really starts and moves from looking at addressing homelessness and those who are really on the edge of our community, that are finding challenges to finding good, suitable homes and just to get off the street. And so there's different levels of and programs at that end of the spectrum where we have our shelters and our more supportive housing, which has 24/7 supports within that, and outside supports from our health authorities as well that come in and provide care, healthcare, and other services for people who have been able to be housed in those buildings. And then, of course, moving through this spectrum is a wider range of different types of social housing and rental assistance within the private market. There's, rental assistance programs like our shelter aid for elderly renters, our rental assistance program that facilitate within those programs in those buildings. And then moving farther on, we look to, where we have our housing hub, which is trying to assist with people who are first-time home buyers trying to get into the market and create more affordable stepping stones into the market at that. So I'll pass this on to Rachel.
Thanks, Douglas. So now we covered the housing ecosystem. Now we really want to talk about what's going on in Nelson specifically. What are Nelson's housing needs and their demographics? So we have a couple statistics here, and those come from the homelessness report card that was published in 2022. And these are the ones that really stuck out to us that we wanted to share. So 37% of the city of Nelson rent their homes. 30% is typically the benchmark of what folks should spend of their income on housing. Here in Nelson, we see 36% spend more than 30% of their income on their housing needs, whether that's mortgage or renting, whatever it might be. 19% are in core housing needs, and so that's housing that falls below at least one of the adequacy and affordability or suitability standards. So maybe a large family living in a one-bedroom apartment, for example. And I think a very prominent statistic here is the 0% vacancy rate here in Nelson, which of course makes it incredibly hard for anyone who's looking to rent a place in the community. They're pretty much non-existent. Next slide, Douglas. All right, so this one is the Pathways to Homelessness. We do want to talk about this as the supportive housing advisor here with BC Housing. I support all of our homeless shelters here in the Kootenays and Shuswap. And so I think some of the misconception that comes with looking at someone who is accessing a homeless shelter and is finding themselves in the situation of being homeless, we immediately think that that person might be struggling with substance use or addiction issues of any kind. So alcohol, drugs, gambling, whatever it might be. I think here we really want to focus on the number of factors that contribute to an individual finding themselves either precariously housed or homeless. So folks who are precariously housed, for example, would be living in their car or maybe couch surfing from friend to friend or family to family. So a couple of the factors here that we just put in, are poverty, lack of affordable housing, of course, we touched on in the previous slide with the 0% vacancy rate, discrimination, family violence and abuse, traumatic events. And two I really want to touch on here are the transition planning from child welfare. So young adults who find themselves aging out of ministry care may not have the planning skills or supports available for them to find stable long-term housing. And that kind of ties into the discharge planning from publicly funded institutes and systems. So for example, from hospitals and corrections. If individuals find themselves in those situations, it's very, very difficult for them to come out in the community and find stable, safe, affordable housing. Next slide, Douglas. All right, so we want to focus on some of our current developments or ongoing operations and projects here in Nelson. So one of those, of course, is the Stepping Stone Shelter. It's open year-round, 365 days a year. It supports 17 individuals. During winter seasons, the cold weather, just this past winter, we have increased the bed count to add 6 additional beds above that 17. Typically, that goes back down to the 17 units year-round, so spring, summer, and fall. And of course, we provide the meals, hygiene supports, harm reduction supplies, and those connections to community partners. So that might be supporting them with referrals to Interior Health or connecting them with MSDPR, for example. So one of the sorry, Douglas, can we go back there? Thank you. This slide has some great stats I just want to share too, which is the point in time count that was published in February 2022. And so when that came out, there were 88 people experiencing homelessness. So not including hidden homeless. Again, that would be precariously housed folks sleeping in their cars or on someone's couch. This would be the second highest rate of homelessness within the interior. And of that 88, 1/3 are over the age of 55. Thanks, Douglas. So West Houston Street. West Houston Street is operated by Anchors, and in collaboration with BC Housing, they were able to purchase this site, the West Houston site. And it was really a way that BC Housing and Anchors was able to preserve that stable housing within the community. So within West Houston Street, Anchors operates the Kootenay Boundary Adult Supported Recovery Program, the KBSRP. And that is a residential addictions recovery program that's operating here in Nelson. So the KBSRP supports and serves individuals who are 19 years and older who wish to change their relationship with substances. They successfully support people to re-engage meaningfully with their recovery and their communities, which could include finding housing and jobs after having the experience of the supports provided at West Houston Street. Next slide there, Douglas. So as we move along that housing continuum, first we started at the shelter and then more of a supportive housing, health focused with West Houston. Now we're coming over to social, rental, and affordable housing. So again, some statistics here outside of Nelson, 200 families in subsidized housing, 45 seniors in subsidized housing. BC Housing also has two different programs, the RAP and SAFER, which provide subsidies for folks who are eligible. So RAP, Douglas had mentioned earlier, stands for Rental Assistance Program. We have 31 families here in Nelson on that. SAFER, which is the Shelter Aid for Elderly Renters. We have 90 seniors on that program and 20 low-income individuals supported by the Canadian Housing Benefit. And over to you, Douglas.
Thanks, Rachel. So yeah, I just want to speak briefly about the Housing Hub, which is at the far end of our spectrum of creating affordable housing in our communities. And really, this is an interesting program that we have commenced and initiated in our organization not too long ago. And it's really trying to find creative solutions with our partnerships with the building community, primarily developers, but also with municipalities, to look at ways in which we can create pockets of affordability within the market developments where people can afford to get their foot in the market. So it's really geared towards middle income earners in order to perhaps purchase their first home. And so there's a number of creative solutions that we've looked at here. And some of that is to create financing for the developers, which is an incentive for lower interest rates and really good financing options for them in order for them to then turn around and provide a certain number of units, say in a larger development that could go and be earmarked for folks who are at that stage and ready to jump into the private ownership market. And Yeah, and then the other aspect of this is supports for individuals and families to move out of those rental units that they're in and into affordable home ownership. So now I just want to speak about the three big projects that we've just completed in the last couple of years here in Nelson, and I was fortunate to be able to work on all three of those as the development manager. So it really does give me great pride to see them all now fully operational and running. And even though in my role, you often run into all the complexities and some of the challenges of getting these buildings to their final stages, and even beyond that, it's still really great to showcase these. So, as you know, Hall Street Place, it's has 47 units, and it's really a mixture of housing, primarily serving low to moderate income families and seniors. And the great thing Rachel just presented on Anchors is that Nelson Cares had that home that they're housing those individuals in now, and Anchors was often working under our lease agreements with Nelson Cares, and so this was an opportunity for Nelson Cares to sell that home to Anchors and use the equity from that home in this project, and still safeguard that house for affordable housing, not to lose it to the market. So the great thing here is we've included that 6-bed group home that was originally housed in the Anchors home inside this building. So that's been open since 2021. And then Heritage Place with Share as the operator. This also was a real collaborative effort and working closely with the city and city staff and planning staff, and with the Kootenay Christian Fellowship, creating this their Share Housing Society. And what's great here is that, we know, as Rachel has pointed out, that the vacancy rate is one of the lowest in the country, and it's hard for individuals who are working, say, in the service industry, to be able to afford units and be able to afford a home. So this was really the program here to be able to allow those on a moderate income to be able to work and live in Nelson. Then finally, our Lakeside Place, which is primarily focused for seniors and those seniors with disabilities. And again, we feel like this is another great success that's been added to Nelson just this last year. And yeah, we've really enjoyed working with Nelson Cares on this project as well, to see this come to fruition in the city. So I'll turn that back over to Rachel.
Thanks, Douglas. So last but not least, we wanted to share some provincial and BC housing updates. So of course, as many of you guys have heard, we have a new dedicated Minister of Housing, the Honorable Ravi Kahlon, and he has a history of being the Minister of Jobs and Economic Recovery and Innovation. So we're really excited to have him as again, dedicated minister to really support new housing initiatives within the province, but specifically within the interior region. So below that, we have a $4.2 billion budget, and which goes hand in hand with the renewed mandate in housing investments. And so really having a more focus-centered approach around renters, people with middle incomes, Indigenous individuals, students, complex care, which involves really having interior health come to the plate and collaborate with BC Housing and with a nonprofit to really employ those health-specific services within housing. And last but not least, supportive housing. So we've included here on the right-hand side is a picture of Cedar Place. And this is a brand new development. It's in the city of Salmon Arm. It has about 38 rooms, and it is a purpose-built supportive housing building. It's the first of its kind in Salmon Arm, and it has made a huge difference within the community to really provide that safe, stable, affordable housing that also has the supports of a nonprofit that runs it. Sorry. And Cedar Place is run by CMHA, Canadian Mental Health Association. And I think the next slide here is questions.
Okay, thank you. To council. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, just going to stop sharing. That's a
Okay, so we've got some questions from council, starting with Councillor Tate.
Yeah, hi, thanks for the presentation. I get a little bit muddled just trying to understand the continuum, the spectrum of housing. And so I was wondering if you could help me understand, for example, the Hall Street, Heritage, and Lakeside, those units, do those count as subsidized housing or affordable housing when you're talking about the continuum?
That's a good question. So to start with Lakeside, that was under an older funding model when it first came in, and it came without subsidized housing, without the units being supported by our operations subsidies. And I can say on the development side, it was a big challenge because we came in we were very conscious of trying to make Nelson Cares be able to get into operations with, a balanced financial statement as they ran forward with their budget, because it all piled up as the cost of development as the interest rates were rising then. So, and I would move to both Heritage Place and also Hall Street do have subsidies for those units. So there are operational budgets that are aligned to help assist their financial picture for those units as well going forward.
Okay, so I kind of get it. I'm just looking at slide 12. It looks like 12 on mine, but it might be I think it's 12. So, I don't know if it's 12 for you. I think it might be 10 for you. I don't know why it would say 12.
Okay.
It says social, rental, and affordable housing, and it's got the 200 families in subsidized, 445 seniors in subsidized. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes.
Oh,
yeah,
thank
yeah,
you.
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so when I see that, I think of 200 families. I'm like, okay, that's probably 200 households. And I see 45 seniors, so I'm just going to throw it out there and assume that they're living in single dwellings, single homes. So that's 245 households. Our census has 4,950 households in Nelson. Would you say that's a typical percent of subsidized housing for a municipality of our size? Like if we're going to compare to Castlegar or Trail or Summerland?
That's a good question. I may kick that over to Tyler and see if he can answer your question.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and we don't have the data with us right now, but we'd be happy to report back to you.
Thank you.
Mayor Morrison.
So, sorry, thank you. My question is regarding, you talked about a lot of properties you're involved with. I might have missed you commenting on what your relationship is these days with Kiwanis and the properties that we have in Nelson. I was always under the understanding that there was some relationship there with BC Housing, and I'm wondering if it continues currently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that we've been having some more recent conversations with them because we do know that that site adjacent to the apartment building is highly underutilized, and the units the cottages are sitting empty and need to be demolished because of asbestos and other contaminants within them. So it's on our plate to explore further the opportunities that do exist there. And so, we've had ongoing conversations with them about that.
Thanks.
Okay. Councillor Page.
Yeah, thank you, Douglas. Some of the conversations that are had frequently around the economic development table is around that support to the nonprofit versus the for-profit. And I see within your presentation today a number of touch points on private stakeholders. Can you expand on some of the ways that for-profits or corporate partners can or do participate with BC Housing, or is that not a thing, or am I misunderstanding the private stakeholder piece?
No, I would say that's primarily at the other end of our spectrum, which is really our housing hub. And, with that program, it's a lot to do with, looking for creative solutions to, create pockets of affordability within the private market. So for instance, the basic operation of that would be to use our financing and leverage that as an incentive to a developer, a private market developer, to say, let's build some affordable units within your larger development and safeguard those for first-time home buyers and or those trying to get into the market. And then there are other mechanisms as well that are a bit more complex, but they essentially look to cap the profitability for a unit. So, and it tends to roll through the development that as somebody comes in and purchases a unit, there's almost a bit of a cap to how much profit or let's say accumulated assessment will come from that unit, and that again is trying to then safeguard the cost of that unit for the next purchaser. And so somebody who is able to get in and still maybe 2-3 years down the road have some financial gain from the increased value, but not what it would be in a private market situation. So it's trying to temper that and really hold some of those units as affordable. And then there are others, but I'd have to dive a bit deeper into that.
Okay, that is great, and potentially even if some list or something could be sent to council,
yes,
to be shared with our economic development table, so that some of those conversations can be satiated. If I may have a supplemental.
Mm-hmm.
Another conversation I hear quite frequently over at the regional district table, being that we're a rather large regional district with many rural area directors, is the conversation around support within more rural context, and primarily around the supports that usually come with septic, being that there's not always sewer systems attached, and what kind of supports might be available to do that kind of, do rural development or do development of housing that's more suitable for rural context. We're quite dense in our rural areas in certain ways. Is there any advice, support, suggestions on how we can better support our rural districts with housing?
Yeah, again, I'll maybe defer to Tyler if you have some.
Yeah, I mean, it's the models that Douglas talked about. They do work in more rural and remote communities. We have a number of projects in the interior that are smaller, in smaller communities, in the Kootenays, on reserve, in the north, and in the interior, that really do work on a more low density format. Some we've even done some where they're more or less single family homes, and the infrastructure to service those is part of it. The caveat to that is that generally our funding is meant to go towards housing rather than municipal infrastructure, which is to be funded through other from other parts of the province. So as we're looking at provinces in more rural places that might be unserviced, we just kind of have to look carefully at where our money goes and where the money for what kind of should be civil engineering or municipal infrastructure should come from. But we can make projects work in a lot of really remote places for sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Woodward.
Thank you. I was just wondering, my father was involved in building social housing in the 80s in Vancouver, cooperative housing. And it was kind of a bit of a golden era at that time. There was a lot of federal funding, provincial funding. And then that was all pulled. And so cooperative housing wasn't built anymore. Where do you feel like we're at now, sort of in the landscape politically, at the provincial and federal levels of housing funding? I mean, it seems like we're in a better place now, and there's more funding flowing through. Would your assessment agree with that, or are there still struggles going on to get the funding we need?
Again, I'll defer to Tyler. He's.
I mean, yes, I agree with your comments. You know, we're not in the golden era anymore, and there's been a long period of time of underinvestment in housing. And the effect of that is what we see in the communities like Nelson that have 0% vacancy rates. So yes, there is more money flowing into housing right now, but it's going to take a fair amount of time and continued sustained effort for that funding to continue to right the ship and make sure that there is enough housing. A lot of the issues that we're seeing right now, especially on the more affordable end of the housing spectrum, some of them aren't housing related. The crisis of homelessness that we're seeing is impacted by more things than just a lack of housing. Poison drugs on the streets, mental health, underfunding in the mental health system. So we're kind of seeing a lot of things compound to cause the shortages of housing we're seeing all across the housing spectrum. But the province of BC is investing record numbers, billions and billions of dollars to BC Housing and to other types of housing. In addition to BC Housing, the government put some money towards the BC Nonprofit Housing Association, to some other groups to provide student housing. So money is flowing from the province of BC. The federal government is through CMHC. Douglas mentioned the co-investment fund. There's again billions of dollars available there that really we take advantage of and have very good relationships with CMHC. So the money is coming in, and we're seeing the effects of that on the ground. There are a lot of new projects opening up.
Thank you very much. Councillor Lockenberg, may I have a supplemental?
Yep, go ahead.
Thank you. So in your words, quote, to right the ship, are we talking, I mean, this is, of course, a never-ending problem in some ways. It's really about managing a situation rather than fixing a situation. But do you feel like, that we're headed in the right direction to right that ship, and that if we continue down the path we're going with the kind of investments we're getting, we'll actually make some headway?
I don't have a crystal ball, but all we can do is continue to work with communities and build as much housing as we can, and meet the needs as best we can in the community. So I don't know what's going to happen in terms of some of the other factors that I mentioned, mental health, addiction, the drug crisis, and wider market forces. What's going to happen to the interest rate to the volatility in the banking system to in investors in BC. These are all things that impact the housing ecosystem and really are outside of the control of BC Housing. But what we do have charge of is getting new housing online, building relationships with communities and councils like yours to make sure that we can spend the money we have as quickly as possible and make things. That really is what what we do have control over.
Yeah, and I would just add to what Tyler's saying is that although there are complex factors surrounding what we're doing and what we're trying to do, I think there is a sense that housing is a piece of that puzzle that we're trying to solve together with other organizations. But we feel it is a significant and big piece, especially at the nearer end, where there are folks who have had challenges with chronic homelessness, and really to be afforded a safe place to live that's stable really just empowers people to then handle other situations in their life and the other complexities with support. So
thank you very much.
Councillor Payne.
I thank you very much. I'm very excited, Tyler, to hear you say that there's lots of money and we just need to be ready and have projects. So we're on that. I've heard you loud and clear, so we'll do the best we can. I was a little surprised with your statistic that only 31 families in Nelson are taking care of the rental assistance program. Is that seems compared to the 90 seniors that we have taking the safer, taking the availability of the safer program, that's a low number. We just saw the statistics of 36% of our renters are paying more than the affordable 30% threshold of their income. So that's one thing that I'd be interested to know how we can make more of an impact. I feel that there are people out there who are not taking advantage of that, and that's really unfortunate. So if there's anything we can do there, working with our social service agencies, just let us know. I think maybe it could even be something, do municipalities in other areas help you promote that so that more people take advantage of it? That's one just sort of noticing. The other one is I did look at the Housing Hub, and I'm interested to know how long that program has been going on and where you have seen success, because the thresholds as far as a down payment still look a little high to me, considering the average home in Nelson is, what are we basing?
617.
Yes, 617. So it's interesting to me. And, average means that hopefully there is some more affordable housing stock that people could take advantage of. But still, the down payment seems to be the biggest challenge, especially when you're insuring it through CMHC, which is not an inexpensive proposition. So I'm just interested what communities you've seen success in, and maybe we can look there and find ways to mirror that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do a bit of research on my side and talk to our Housing Hub team. I know I've been in conversation with someone on our team there that's we're interested in looking at an opportunity in Nelson currently. So I'll find a bit more of that information and provide that to you. And maybe Rachel, I don't know if you have comments on the other aspect of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question that you posed about the RAP and SAFER programs. Right now here in Nelson, our Nelson Community Services Society, the nonprofit, operates our HOP and HPP, which are homeless prevention and homeless outreach programs. So they're able to actually support folks, whether they're coming into the shelter or on the streets, and support them with applying for those subsidies. But those subsidies, RAP and SAFER, are also on, our BC Housing website. And so anybody who fits those eligibility requirements can actually just go straight to the BC Housing website and apply themselves. So I think it's always important to get the word out and to be aware that those are options in the community. And so if you find or hear of someone who is struggling with housing, being able to direct them to that site and send them the link, I think that would be huge. So
it was huge. As a low-income single mom myself, I took advantage of that program, and it made the difference in the life for my family. So very grateful, but I'd like to see it spread further afield. And I think we do have a number of organizations, the Nelson Community Food Center for one, Kootenay Kids are a couple, that with that information, and maybe they already have it, but I will check it out. Thanks.
Okay. Oh, Councillor Pinheiro.
Hey. So just like you've got this ecosystem graphic here, and it's pretty cool. Just in Nelson, I mean, from my perspective, there seems to be a certain amount of people that, we have this ecosystem or this sort of continuum of housing that we're offering, and you've highlighted a couple of the projects here. There still seems to be people that fall through the gaps in those offerings between, supportive housing and social housing, or, there's definitely people that still don't seem to have access they need, and they're falling through those gaps. And I'm wondering, for whatever reason, some people have dogs and they can't come to the shelter because they have a dog, or some people's, behavior is not acceptable, and that's in that context, and they can't get in the shelter either. And we've seen over the winter some emergency situations, just with the weather and everything, where people can't be housed and they really need to be. I'm wondering, from your perspective, if there is an area where Nelson is lacking, that you could maybe enlighten us on about, just that maybe you've seen in other communities where they've addressed some of those gaps and those areas that people tend to fall through the cracks a little bit, even with, if life were like this graphic, it would be easier, of course. But from your perspective as BC Housing, is there an area that Nelson has the ability to improve that, and where, how, and what would that be, if you have that insight?
Let Rachel go first, and then yeah.
I'd have to jump on in after Douglas. From the operations, I work in homelessness and really covering supportive housing, complex care, shelters, temporary winter shelters, that kind of thing. Certainly complex care. I would say most of the folks who fall through not only just Nelson's cracks and our shelter, for example, here, but provincially, folks need an increase of health supports and that health funding to come into collaboration with BC Housing. Folks who do have significant mental health issues, or even very high physical health needs, don't fit into a shelter service where we don't have one-to-one care. We don't have frontline shelter staff are not trained as nurses or to do wound care, that kind of thing. And so complex care for sure. I would always say that for all of our communities here in the interior, as well as more supportive housing. And so just having a continuation, so we don't have a bottleneck of folks entering the shelter. And again, those 0% vacancy rates, they have nowhere to go from there. And so by having multiple streams of supportive housing, it allows them to really go into, again, safe, affordable, supported living, so that, and some folks, again, will stay in supportive housing, maybe their entire lives. Lots of folks move, again, along the housing ecosystem and go from shelter to supportive housing to affordable market rentals to maybe home ownership. So that's what we always want to see. And so at least from the operations perspective, complex care and supportive housing. Douglas, Tyler?
Yeah, I was just going to add. I think that's great. Thank you, Rachel. I was going to add. There's on the other points of that continuum. There are, in working with Lakeside, let's say as an example, we had, I think, Jenny had over 400 tenants on the wait list for when Lakeside opened up. So it gives you a bit of a spectrum. And there was sort of controversy at the time, and people were sort of saying, oh, well, they must be all from out of town. There couldn't be that many. And we went through the list several times to confirm that, well over 85, 90% of that list were local people to the Nelson area. And it just kind of twigged in my mind that, here's another spectrum on that housing continuum that are people that are falling through the cracks. And to tie in what Rachel's saying, Nelson Cares under Jenny, we looked at the Kayleen Center as a possible location to provide supportive housing for those who are aging in a homelessness or hard, barely housed conditions, because that stat that Rachel had said, 1/3 of we're finding are over 55 years of age. And so we have this increasing amount of seniors that are still struggling with homelessness in your community and others across the province. So that's a whole other demographic as well that we're seeing. And so it necessarily means that we have to change our housing model as well.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Payne,
Tate, I'm
Kate
Tate.
Tate.
Hi. Thanks so much for your really thorough answers. I like what Rachel said about the complex care. It sounds like that would mean more partnerships with Interior Health, right? That's not just a city and a BC housing piece. I think I'm understanding what you're saying there. Is there any strategy, or is there a process to determine from a BC housing standpoint whether what gets built is directed or specified for folks with disabilities or Indigenous folks, or like I know the Lakeside Place was for seniors. Do you have any requirements as to like what type of housing gets built in a place? If what I'm wondering is like, okay, so we're not allowed any more senior housing because we just did senior housing, or we need to like that's a kind of simplified kind of a question. Do you have a strategy around that, or?
It's a good question, and there's and I'll maybe defer to Tyler to answer that.
Sure. So the different programs that Douglas spoke about sort of operate differently. So some of the directly delivered projects, such as supportive housing, the Women's Transition Housing Fund, those BC Housing is going out working with municipalities to identify where there's opportunities to deliver those projects. We are focused on communities where we're seeing the most need, and the need for homelessness services is indicated by a point in time count, which was recently undertaken. Rachel might be able to correct me, but across the province to identify how many people are facing housing need in the communities. And that will sort of identify where we look most for opportunities. But both of those programs are opportunistic. There just might not be land available or a willing municipality in the community that is the most need. So that is in the most need. So we might go somewhere else. So that's why it's really key to have the municipality on board and identifying sites where things can happen rather than putting up roadblocks. To date, Nelson has been a great partner. No roadblocks in place here. So we've had a number of projects come on board. The other two funds, the Community Housing Fund and the Indigenous Housing Fund, those operate on a competition request for proposals basis. So BC Housing issues a request for proposals generally once every 2 years, something like that. And proponents put projects in that they are interested in delivering. One of the metrics we evaluate those on is whether the projects are meeting a need in the community. So, if there isn't a demonstrated housing need for seniors, but a seniors housing project comes in, that would score low in that criteria. So we do, for each of them, they are responding to the needs in the community, but just in a slightly different way.
Oh, that's really helpful. That's very helpful information. Thank you.
Okay, so seeing no more from council, I'm going to just ask one question before we wrap up. It's building on what you just said, Tyler, that the way you're assessing need, it seems to me that you're looking at vacancy rate and homelessness as probably the two sort of indicators of need. Is that right?
Well, the need for the Community Housing Fund and the Indigenous Housing Fund is indicated by a housing needs assessment, which is submitted as part of the application. So it's a more holistic picture than just vacancy rate. It talks about demographics, the existing building stock, the projects that are slated to come online, like in the pipeline for development. So it's a little bit of a more holistic look than just looking at vacancy rate. But that being said, vacancy rate is a good indicator. When you see 0, it means you need.
It seems to me, and to represent something that I think I've heard from some members of the community, that there's a concern that if Nelson's a willing partner, as you say, and BC Housing wants to get these projects done as fast as they can, clearly they're going to go to where there's a willing partner. Nelson's proven historically to be a willing partner. So if Nelson continues to do these projects ahead of, let's say it's neighbors, Castlegar Trail, and others, you get this scenario where, it's an infinite demand. So we'll continue to draw from those areas where there's no housing in Castlegar and Trail and other places to Nelson to occupy. And so the homelessness as a measure of need never gets resolved because you have an infinite or near infinite supply of people looking for housing. So I guess my question or concern is we've as a council, I think of it, recognize the need to take a regional approach to this so that we want to make sure that we're doing this together with our other municipality neighbors, and then do stuff like invest in transit to provide sort of if you do happen to live in Selmo or BC Housing project takes place in Selmo, but you're going to work in Nelson, a safe, reliable transit service makes that addresses the equity problem, as opposed to in a municipality that is very land poor and very dense and very expensive. For us being a willing partner and trying to build here because we're a willing partner undermines what's probably the approach we should be taking, and that's building in Selmo, building in Castlegar, building in Trail. Are these some of the considerations that you take when you're looking at it, or is it, from what I'm hearing, the willing partners tend to get the projects and places like Castlegar Trail where there's a homelessness problem, they'll just migrate, unfortunately, to Nelson because that's where the housing is?
Yeah, it's not to say that we aren't going to be delivering projects in places where the municipality, isn't immediately putting land forward or putting a project forward, where we continue to seek to deliver a project there using whatever means are necessary to meet the need in the community. So not to say that, we currently are looking to deliver projects across the region, not just in Nelson. Yeah.
Yeah.
So definitely taking a regional approach is important. It's something that we consider when we're looking at those point in time counts, because we know that they're not, well, one, they're not 100% indicative. It's exactly what it said at the point in time, and people move around. So if they're counted in Castlegar one day, they might be in Trail the next day. It's another reason why our teams are organized regionally as well. Rachel looks after all of the supportive housing projects in the Kootenay, so has a good handle on all of those communities. And then on Douglas and my side, we're organized for the interior region, but Douglas's projects are more focused in the Kootenays as well. So we're sort of organized to have a focus on what's going on regionally as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you go ahead.
Well, I would just add to that willing partners definitely go far in being able to collaborate, because in that diagram we showed earlier that it does take all those different partnerships to make a project actually come to fruition. And sometimes, often, and as you very well know in Nelson, it's property, land, and how do we acquire that? And we're down the road from you. We're facing that very issue in Trail to try and find appropriate locations and land that will facilitate a project. So without that, it's a different kind of challenge.
Yeah, and that was what triggered the question. Actually, is the example in Trail where they did have some land identified. Council had supported it. It was moving ahead, and then council sort of balked at the, I don't know, it was last minute, but it was a disappointing outcome, I think, for the whole region.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
can I just ask a follow-up?
Sure.
Just, do you have stats by, like, for our region? How you had the stats for Nelson with how many subsidized units, etc. Is there a report somewhere, or is it on your website for each of our communities?
Mm-hmm.
Specific to a certain demographic group, or in general?
You had that slide that said 200 families were supported by subsidized
housing.
Yes. So is there a report somewhere that shows that what our region, because I know our elected officials have these conversations with their colleagues, and having that data to say, here's how much subsidized housing's in Nelson, Trail, Castlegar, Selma, or whatever, I think would be helpful, because I think we kind of guessed at that.
Yeah. Our research department can pull those numbers pretty straightforward for you. So maybe we'll connect afterwards on a more specific request, just so we're not, providing something not useful. But definitely, I mean, where BC Housing's projects are located is a matter of public record. So it's not something that we're trying to hide or anything. So definitely, we can compile it in a way that meets your needs.
Okay, that'd be awesome. Thanks.
So Tyler, thank you for that. Douglas and Rachel too. And I think we've got 3 bits of homework for you, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know. Okay, good. You've written them down. Excellent. Thank you very much. We appreciate the work that BC Housing has done for us and for the province, and commend you on your hard work and your vision. So thank you. Okay.
Thanks very much.
So housing continues with our next presentation. So Tom Thompson from the Nelson Area Economic Development Partnership, Sandy McKay and Jenna Hildebrand from Macola Development Services are going to be presenting their findings from the Greater Nelson Housing Study Phase 1. And Tom, I think I'm going to go over to you.
Well, thank you very much. Certainly an awful lot of housing discussion tonight, and we're really pleased to see so much attention placed on housing, whether it be seniors housing, supportive housing, or even the study that we've been looking at. And the Economic Development Partnership with the Chamber and Community Futures and the City of Nelson and the 2 electoral areas, we're really focusing, and we engage the services of Macola Developments to explore strategies and tools to facilitate non-market housing in the greater Nelson area. So non-market housing is specifically targeted for people that are in the workforce, maybe families, working families, or individuals. And without any further ado, these are the folks that did all of the fine work. Sandy McKay and Jenna Hildebrand from Macola Developments.
Thanks, Tom. I appreciate the introduction. Yeah, it's a lot of housing today, and you're going to get more. This is just phase one of this project, so you'll expect to see us back a couple of more times with some greater findings as we move forward. My name is Sandy Mackey. I'm the Housing Research and Policy Lead at Macola Development Services. I'm joining you today from the traditional territory of the Lekwungen, Shwepsum, and Wasonic peoples at our head office just outside of Victoria, British Columbia. It's actually the building that's on the front page of Douglas's slide packet. If you wanted to look back and see it, that's our office. We occupy the ground floor of an affordable housing development here. And I'm joined by my colleague, Jenna, who's with me today as well.
Hi there, I'm Jenna Hildebrand. I'm a project planner with Macola Development Services, and I'm joining today from the traditional unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations here in Vancouver. And yeah, super excited to continue the conversation tonight.
Sandy, Jenna, you have a presentation?
Yeah, it should be just about to pop up.
Here we go.
Great, look at that. Okay, so... Great. So quickly, the objectives of the Greater Nelson Housing Entity Study. It's not just for the City of Nelson. It's also a partnership with the Regional District of Central Kootenay to incorporate some conversations around electoral area E and F as well. The objectives are to assess the need for a local government-supported housing entity, whatever that looks like. Explore strategies and tools to facilitate non-market affordable housing in the Greater Nelson area with a specific focus on options to meet the needs of moderate income working families and individuals. Often this is called workforce housing. A lot of this housing is targeted at many of the needs that Douglas has outlined in his report, including the zero vacancy rate needs, the rising cost of homeownership necessitating more people renting longer into their lifetimes, and the rising cost of rents, and really just the limited amount of rental units available in the Greater Nelson area. But for some background, let's go into our process a bit. At the beginning of the study, we reviewed 13 successfully established housing authorities, corporations, and nonprofits that are currently being operated by local governments and municipalities. We also developed a series of housing organization option models, conducted engagement over the past few months, and have completed the phase one report. This is just phase one, and we'll be doing phases 2 and phases 3 in coming months. So, and I think a part of phase 2 is some really specific council engagement and doing some actual learning session work. So if there are specific things you would like to know about this process or specific questions you have about the different types of affordable housing and supported housing, I'm happy to build that into that session. So another housing continuum for you. Instead of BC Housings, this is from CMHC, the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. It outlines, just as the BC Housing one did, homelessness on the far left all the way to market housing on the far right. But what it doesn't really do is talk about tenure and how people legally have a relationship to their home or financially have a relationship to their home. To do that, we often use a graph that looks like this. This is adapted from the city of Kimberley, and it includes market options on the far right and non-market options on the left. Non-market or market housing is where most of us access our housing in British Columbia. It has prices or rents set by market factors, and those prices and rents have increased dramatically in recent years. They've outpaced the growth of income. It has not been released yet, but in a couple of weeks, we expect that the RDCK's regional housing, RDCK's Affordable Housing Action Plan is going to be released, and in that is included a package of new and updated housing data that shows that the median income in Nelson is no longer able to afford the cost of the median home in Nelson. So we're seeing not only in the rental market, but in the ownership market that prices are exceeding income growth and truly are not affordable for many residents. Non-market housing has prices and rents that are removed from market factors. Often we call these secured affordable options or secured affordable housing. Basically, it means that the tenant of that unit knows that it's going to be affordable for as long as they live there. And that's incredibly important when making other financial planning decisions, when deciding how you can contribute to your community economically or through your work or volunteer labor. All of those pieces give a greater degree of stability to the occupant of the unit. Typically, these units are funded by senior government, like BC Housing, and like the federal government through the National Housing Strategy. They are often operated by a nonprofit or some cases a local government, or in some cases even BC Housing itself will operate these units in your community. And non-market units are critical to increasing affordability across your community. Non-market units, and especially increasing the number of non-market units, are one of the only ways that we actually see a balance in the costs of rents in the private market as well. It's truly one of the only ways that you can actually decrease the cost of housing in your community, not just stabilize it through adding more stock. So a couple of key definitions. Affordable housing, I'm sure most of you know this already, but it can be market, it can be non-market, it can be owned, it can be rented, provided it costs less than 30% of the occupying household's pre-tax income. That's the only kind of indicator that makes something an affordable housing option. Getting into some more detail, non-market affordable rental housing, so there's a couple of other things that we've added in there. In most cases, it is effectively identical to market rental housing. The only significant difference is the cost of rent. It's typically subsidized through grants or through an ongoing operating subsidy by senior government, and often operated by a local government or a nonprofit entity, workforce housing is an additional subsection of this non-market affordable rental category. It is affordable to individuals and families who earn around the median income in a community. You can also tie eligibility for these units to employment status. So the focus of this study, going back to this graph, is in that kind of orange box here, looking at how we increase non-market affordable units in Greater Nelson. And what kind of entity would be the best to do that. So our findings after engagement were that there is still a gap in Nelson, not only a needs gap, but also a gap in the offerings of some of the current nonprofits and housing related services that are in their community. Some of your nonprofits may choose to operate more non-market affordable rental units in the future, but at the moment, there is less desire to develop these units right now, which means there's a space for an entity to step into that gap. You also need significantly more units to support working families and individuals in Greater Nelson, and bridging this gap should be the primary focus of any local government or regionally supported housing entity. A great thing that we found through this was there was huge support for a local government supported entity. Your business community actually sponsored this project and has been really critical to its success. Many employers and businesses support housing for critical workers especially, and your housing nonprofits were very welcoming of us when we went to some of their meetings and suggested that additional partner would be welcome in the housing ecosystem in Nelson. However, they did stress that any new organization should complement and collaborate rather than compete for limited resources. And as well, any new entity should be a made in Greater Nelson solution. It needs to, use the really strong nonprofit ecosystem, the strong private sector that you've got, and leverage the assets that are in your community rather than, trying to do something that's not made for you. So if the goal is to increase the number of non-market affordable rental units, how do we get there? Well, this one way to do it is, the benefit of this goal is that it's really simple and really direct, and it responds to the most critical needs in your community. It also allows for multiple implementation options. So it shouldn't matter who develops these units, provided they support the residents of the Greater Nelson. It could be developed and operated by a municipal corporation. They could be developed through partnerships with the private sector. They can, or leveraging things like what Douglas talked about in terms of the different options that BC Housing has for supporting affordability in the market. And it's also flexible. So as implementation mechanisms mature, and the needs and funding programs change, this goal can also adapt. It can be something that moves towards maybe affordable homeownership in the future, but at the moment, we're focusing on non-market affordable rental units. And so our recommendations from phase one, in the short to medium term, we are recommending that you expand formalized government support for these types of units as well as other affordable housing options. That includes expanding the ability of your staff to encourage and promote non-market affordable housing options across the board. It includes implementing some municipal tools like a asset identification and disposal strategy, which will allow you to more quickly and easily dispose of lands that you own for affordable and non-market use. As well, continuing to do the work that your staff are already doing, encouraging developers to build certain units into their buildings, encouraging affordability in exchange for specific density allowances, things like that. Not only does formalized government support support this specific type of unit, non-market affordable units, it also supports other organizations that are trying to develop necessary units, and it can be implemented alongside recommendation 2. Recommendation 2 is to create a new housing entity. This could take on multiple forms, including corporation or a nonprofit. Those are the most common, but there are multiple forms it can take. It could operate at an arm's distance from the city and the RDCK, be governed by a board of directors, and have bylaws that determine that board's composition. It could act as a developer and operator, like in Revelstoke or Whistler, or it could act as a land steward and facilitator and partner with an external housing developer to facilitate new builds. This is kind of how it works in Tofino. There are a number of proposed funding mechanisms that we've not dug into great detail with these, including direct funding commitments through the city and the RDCK, funding through BC Housing and CMHC. This organization would be eligible for many of the different programs that Douglas discussed in his presentation. And one of the biggest ways that you can contribute is what you're already doing, so through land contributions from the city. It does have a few advantages. Arm's length independence, you would maintain ownership of the properties if you did them on a long-term lease instead of just disposing them through sale. As well, it allows for flexibility, but there's going to be challenges, staff recruitment coordination, and duplication of resources and funding, as well as competition for funding. So doing the work to minimize those risks at the beginning is critical. And that's it. So, I mean, I know there's a lot there, and we have been working sort of for 6 months on this project, and trying to condense it down into a short council presentation is always difficult. So I'm happy to answer questions now, but know that as we move forward with this work, you will be engaged regularly, and there's actually going to be some specific council sessions where you're able to provide input on the potential form or characteristics of this organization if that's the way you choose to go.
Great. Thank you, Sandy. And so what I'm hearing is that this will be coming back to us. We'll have lots of opportunity to dig into the details. So with that being said, do we have any questions? Councillor Woodward, then Councillor Page. Oh, is it Janice?
Thank you, Councillor.
Oh, it's Jesse. Okay. Go ahead, Jesse.
Thank you, Councillor Lautenberg. So my question is protection of the city. So as you were doing a presentation, I kept thinking about this idea of development and the inherent risks involved in that. And that, we are a risk-averse organization considering we're working with taxpayer money. So how do you protect the city if you're basically asking the city to become a developer? How do you protect the city and the taxpayer from inherent risk?
It's a great question. So you don't have to be the developer. There are many ways that this model, an arm's length corporation or nonprofit can work. You could take on the role of just being a sort of steward and facilitator and actually work with an external housing developer to do the development and operations work. So that's one way to do it. As the other ways to do it would be that you are taking on more risk and acting as a developer, but that risk would be couched in either an arm's length nonprofit where you work with a lawyer to make sure that at the founding of the organization, the city and the regional district are protected from any of the risks that arm's length nonprofit takes, or through an arm's length corporation, which would have similar protections built in for the city and the regional district. the good news is you're not the first one to do this, right? Likely you'll be the first one to make this specific version of this entity, but there are many, many examples of an entity like this existing across British Columbia, and all of those municipalities and all of those regional districts have had to have a similar conversation about risk before they began this process. So we're able to borrow from a lot of different sources in order to protect the future sort of the future of the city and the future of the regional district.
Councillor
Thank you.
Councillor Page.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Sandy. At this point, I feel like I've had all my clarifying questions, having seen various forms of this presentation a number of times now. My question is to staff. So we're hearing that there's a timing of council sessions set up for phases 2 and 3, and I'm looking for a sense of when we will be doing those, as well as just a confirmation that all the funding pieces are secured for phases 2 or 3, that we don't have to make any decisions to let you know that we would like to just go gung-ho on getting those research projects done.
Yeah, no, the budget was secured back in 2022, so we're within budget.
Okay.
And the model with partnering with the RDCK has basically split the cost, so we're okay on the budget front. And Sandy, feel free to jump in on the timing piece, but so we're essentially completing phase 1, and we'll take that information and jump into phase 2, and phase 2 has a few different components to it, but one big component is working with the elected officials to do kind of a visioning exercise of what does this look like? Who is it for? What are our priorities? And then into really touching base on Councillor Woodward's point, like how does this take form? So that's what we'll be looking at. And I believe the timing for this second phase was 5 to 6 months, but we'd be starting sooner rather than later. So I don't have a date, but it'll be ongoing.
Okay. Supplemental. So my secondary question is, Macola has laid out some short and medium-term goals, specifically including a land disposition, policy or planning exercise. What do we need from council? Is it a referral to a business meeting, referral to a strat session to sanction or not some of these short and medium-term recommendations and give direction to take those on?
Well, I think it'd be worth maybe through the strategic planning sessions that are upcoming to talk about what Nelson's already doing on those short-term items, right? So I think it's first and foremost is to highlight that. Also is to work with the housing committee to, to go through a lot of that kind of heavy lifting and looking at what are we not doing that we could be doing, and how does that feed into next year's work plan? So that would be my advice, is know what we're actually doing, get a clear sense of that, and then, try and see what are other maybe short-term things that we could do within the realms of, without having to go into really the details of creating that housing entity.
Just a supplemental, if I may, a second supplemental. In the recommendations, what I see in here is a recommendation, at least from Macola, to formalize government support for some of these initiatives in terms of ensuring staff have the right tools and levers to encourage non-market. Maybe these aren't specific enough, or they need more work within the housing committee, is what I'm hearing. Or like when I hear land disposition plan, it's a common refrain in the community as we dispose of and remove properties or put them up for sale. Why isn't that going to affordable or supported or one of the other major projects? And so there does seem to be a need for at least some of these to be brought back to council and decided upon, and whether that's things we actually want to be formalizing.
Sebastian, would that not be this next part of this engagement? Because councils have a lot of different choices with if you dispose of you know, I always say, if you dispose of one asset, what are you going to invest it in? So it could be making land available for housing, but it could be a new sewage treatment plant or whatever, right? So you have multiple choices of what that land is. You might have a piece of land that was there for utilities. Do you put it back in utilities or whatever? So I would say you get into those discussions when you have this chance as that second part of that engagement and see that larger picture. Here's, you know, we're not, you know, we did this kind of land inventory a number of years ago. We do not have a lot of just vacant lands that, you know, they're all on, you know, they're vacant because they're steep. They have utilities. They have something not very, you know, easy about them. But anyway, I think that level of detail is this next phase. I would suggest you don't want to look at a short-term you know, I think that's just saying, here's some things that, you know, others are doing without sort of knowing the specifics of Nelson and Greater Nelson. You know, anyway, I would think we'd get more into that in the future, in this next phase.
Is that the case, Sadie, that these don't have specific context of Nelson?
I mean, they do have some specific context in that we worked with, you know, Sebastian and your staff and the staff at the RDCK to look at some of what their current tools are and what some of the, you know, best practices from around BC are, but they certainly have not been built out to any degree, and we have not included, you know, a budget line item or a timeline item or anything like that to get these things done. They're still very, very high level. If I did have a recommendation, it would be before you make any decisions on how to proceed with those short-term recommendations, you wait until the RDCK releases its Affordable Housing Action Plan. I think there'll be an opportunity to partner on maybe creating some of those tools together. And outlining some priorities together to do that work. But the other thing we can do is I will work with Sebastian to maybe highlight sort of 3 key policies that would fill gaps in staff's toolbox already.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay. Councillor Payne.
I hope mine's just a quick question, but Jenna, when you and Sandy presented to the Housing Committee a couple of weeks ago, you mentioned that the report was nearly finalized and it could be distributed at that point in time. Is it ready for council to take a look at it so that everyone can see the variety of communities that you did this research in and the different forms that you're considering we look at as well? Does that make sense as the next step for council?
It does, yeah. It was really interesting that we pulled, I think, 13 or 14 different communities that have a similar entity. So there's a lot in there that's really interesting. I don't know when it will be available through the NAEDP and through Community Futures. They're the organization that actually is holding it right now. I imagine it will be imminent, though, and I'm sure it will be distributed to council as soon as possible. Andrea, who is unfortunately, she's on vacation this week, so probably not until next week at the earliest is my guess.
Okay, so we'll just follow up with her then.
Yeah, and I will follow up as well.
Thank you.
Sandy, Jenna, thank you. Tom, do you have anything to add before we move on?
No, I just like the fact that phase 1 is completed and we're working towards phase 2. All of the sector studies that we did with food and beverage, the retail sector, and also labor, builders, developers. There's clearly a need for some form of workforce housing in this area. We've done a lot more research with McCullough leading some of that, and the Chamber will continue to work hard, and the Economic Development Partnership is happy to be helping to move this partnership forward.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Thanks, Jenna and Sandy. We look forward
Thanks,
to
everyone.
the next phase.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay. Next, we're moving into our closed portion of the meeting. So we're going to allow our audience to step out.
Just wondering, is it just Douglas from BC Housing?
Looks like
Yeah, no, I know, because there was there's a second link set it, so if it's just him, then we're good, but if there's a second link that. I know,
With
but if there's other
Yeah.
people from BC Housing.
Douglas, is there anyone else coming, Douglas, from BC Housing?
Well, yeah, I think they were on hold here until. Do you want us to sign into the other link, or can we stay on this? Because they could sign back.
I think they can just jump back on.
And the public broadcasting is?
I shut it down.
Okay,
I'm
great.
not there yet, but I just wanted to figure that out. When we go in.
Okay.
Hi, thank you.
I'm having a
Good
stretch
night.
break while we do that.
Thank you. Yeah, Douglas, if you can have them jump back on.
Could you grab that door, please?
Yeah, I will.
Okay.
That's why I actually stood up. I thought I'll stretch while I
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay, sounds good. Okay, so we're gonna just do, I'll need my resolution to close the meeting to the public.
So moved.
Thank you. In a second, Councillor Tate, all in favor? Thank you.
I have numbers.